Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It's Thursday, August 15th, 2019. I'm Michael Brooks on a Michael Thursday, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report, broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Vijay Prashad, Executive Director of the Tricontinental Institute, Chief Editor at LeftWord Books, Chief Correspondent at Globetrotter. We're talking about the India's tearing up of its own constitution for a nationalist extremist project in Kashmir, Pakistan's own escalations. What is China's role in potentially pulling South Asia back from the brink? Trump's Iran absurdities, and Vijay is just back from Brazil, where we'll be talking about social movements there and the effort to free political prisoner Lula da Silva, how that is inseparable from any global struggle against all of these currents, from the United States to Brazil to India to Israel, where Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has announced Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, they're not getting into the country. Apparently, this is a personal request of Donald Trump. I guess go back to where you came from, unless it is occupied Palestine. Kashmir cross-border filer kills 3 Pakistani and 5 Indian troops. U.S. applied to seize detained Iranian vessel in Gibraltar. The Chinese paramilitary exercises are amassing a clear threat to demonstrators in Hong Kong. An autopsy of Jeffrey Epstein finds broken bones in Jeff Epstein's neck, deepening questions around his death, according to the Washington Post. Yeah, I would say so. A lot of questions.
Some pretty deep questions.
Some very deep questions.
To the center of the earth
to
questions.
This is a time we really got to ask, is this who we are? Are we are we a global blackmail pedophilia network going back to the OSS and Roy Cohn? Is this who we are? NYPD police union boss, sorry for sharing a racist video, but don't worry, he has black friends. Children of temporary status holders fight for their parents' protections in court. The Trump administration aims to shift money for even more immigration terrorism. Stocks losses deepen as a Trump recession looms. House Homeland Security Committee to subpoena the owner of 4chan. And Jeffrey Epstein owned a picture of Bill Clinton in a blue dress.
Hell yeah.
Is this who we are? Is this who we are? Are we really a CIA-orchestrated global pedophile ring with photos of Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky's dress? Is this who we are?
You know, I don't mind
Devils?
some focus on 4chan stuff. I think disrupting alt-right sort of networks is important, but how was it we see subpoenas on the Epstein front?
Yeah, I don't know about all that 4chan. And I'm planning some content with a very good friend of mine, an academic, Drew Mikhael, who's based at Queen's University in Belfast, and he does a lot of work across the globe on deradicalization. And we were talking about how, from a social psychology perspective, there's vastly different environments, obviously. There's vastly different justifications. One would have a lot more understanding, in some ways, obviously, why someone in Yemen or even years ago in Northern Ireland might engage in certain contact than in somebody who, is from El Paso. But the core mechanisms of how you radicalize somebody, whether it's Al Qaeda, neo-Nazi, whatever, is similar. It's global. It's playing on sets of very similar psychological needs, and I think that conversation does need to go to the forefront more than worrying about this or that website. Although I do think it's fascinating that the owner of 4chan, I mean, I don't know if this is the current owner they're subpoenaing, but the guy who created the website regularly asks that the website be taken down. He doesn't have control over it, obviously, but he said on multiple occasions, basically, that he would prefer the thing just be taken down.
Like the FBI has said they might look at QAnon and groups like that for domestic terrorist-related reasons. And before you start cheering stuff like that
Don't cheer that.
think about the general concept of criminalizing conspiracy theories about elite pedophile rings and why that might be important to like sort of maintain the space for.
I've said
days.
from the beginning that, well, and we see this in these social media things. I shared no tears for whoever has been shut down or deplatformed, Alex Jones, whatever. Great, who cares? But if you can't see a pattern of how conversation and journalism, including quite important stuff, will get shut down in that trend line, including, I always use an example, Facebook relying on essentially right-wing think tanks in D.C. to sort of establish what is and isn't credible, and the fact that they've shut down, look, Telesur shouldn't be your only source for news in Latin America, no doubt, but it's an important and credible source of news, and it's going to be treated as conspiracy news because, frankly, any news that just has a South-centric viewpoint is going to get put to the bottom of those lists. I mean, this is just basic politics here, and yes, it is very disturbing when the FBI starts getting into that territory, even if it does include some people who are dangerous and terrible and stupid and all the rest. If you can't, some people, you got to sit back and have a little bit of a broader pattern recognition on these things. Or not. You could, instead of having broader pattern recognition, you could be Ben Shapiro and have the same degree of charisma and empathy in equal measure that he has, which is to say negative on both fronts. Kamala Harris has been out campaigning, and in her attempt to prove some populist bona fides, which are just bluntly not in any way deserved based off of her record, she's noting, as many candidates have noted, but as people like Bernie Sanders, of course, have been saying for years, even before it was fashionable, that a lot of Americans have to work two different jobs to basically survive. Now, of course, you could be in the gig economy, how we measure those employment rates. That adds a whole bunch of other Americans. You could be working one job and not getting paid enough. You could be long-term unemployed and off of the rolls and not even included in unemployment statistics. So even just that one metric points to a bigger structural problem of inequality and a lot of people not being able to survive.
Hey, if you work in the gig economy, you're not working a job, okay? You're an entrepreneur. That's
right. Every single person struggling to survive on an Uber shift is really just essentially Jeff Bezos and the service sector. Here's Ben Shapiro. This is Kamala first, and then Ben Shapiro is going to respond to her.
He's going around crowing about how this economy is doing so well, right? Oh, the economy is great, he says, right? And they refer to the unemployment numbers. Well, yeah, I'm traveling our country. Let me tell you something. Yeah, people are working. They're working 2 and 3 jobs. And in our America, we must agree nobody should have to work more than one job to have a roof over their head and food on the table.
Okay, well, that seems also, basic and commonsensical, but here Ben Shapiro has the same amount of problem with this rhetoric coming from Kamala Harris as he does looking at the camera in a head-on shot. And I know that I don't always maintain camera eye contact either, which I should, but this is a little bit of a different setup than Shapiro has, and there's a lot more lights going on and a lot more dynamic activity in the studio. Why on earth, if you have a static shot like this and you know that you cannot look at the camera, you would set it up like that is beyond me. But I'm sorry to lose track here of the substance. This is Ben Shapiro.
Well, the fact is that if you had to work more than one job to have a roof over your head or food on the table, you probably shouldn't have taken the job that's not paying you enough. That'd be a you problem.
Can we just let that sink in? In a country that we know, in a global economy that we know, is defined by structural inequities and multiple barriers to getting well-paying jobs. This kid is literally saying, if you work at Walmart or something full-time and you need to get another job in order to survive at the bare minimum, you should have just not taken the Walmart job. You should have just become an engineer at Google instead. That is basically what he's saying. So this is already, we're already completely effed in terms of making any sort of sense here. But let's play it out.
Well, the fact is that if you had to work more than one job to have a roof over your head or food on the table, you probably shouldn't have taken the job that's not paying you enough. That'd be a you problem. Also, it is not true that the vast majority of people in the United States are working two jobs. It just is not true. According to the census.
So
she didn't say vast majority.
Yeah, she didn't say vast majority. And I would also say, the people that have to work, the whole thing about having to work more than one job is bad, but it's also the case where we just need to have people get more from the one job or the work that they do now,
right?
Regardless of if that's one job, two jobs, or three, right?
Precisely.
We don't need more jobs. We need better jobs.
We need better jobs, unions, and higher wages. But okay. So first, there's the total lack of empathy, and of course, it will surprise no one that, of course, Ben Shapiro is another trust fund baby brat who's never had to struggle or deal with anything in his life. He's got a weird, he's part of this bizarre conservative obsession with like teenage, with like immediately post-pubescent boys who can get up on stage and demand tax cuts and agitate for the invasion of Iraq. That's where he comes from, which, look, if he had a normal psychic trajectory, he would be like that kid, Jonathan Cohn, who was actually on this show years ago. And he was just like, I don't know why adults wanted to see me as a 13-year-old talk about like why we shouldn't have gun control or whatever. That's kind of weird. I'm in college now, and I'd appreciate if everybody would leave me alone and let me grow up as a proper, fully paid up member of the human race. But Ben Shapiro never had that growth or break, so he's basically just the same thing as he was when he was 14. He's just a kind of odd little right-wing propagandist who came from nothing but ease. So there's that obvious thing. Then there's the who gets to have jobs and why thing, which is, of course, immediately erased by this. And even though Kamala Harris didn't say most, but even if you stipulated that it was, say, between 5, 6, or 8, or even 8% of the population, that is still millions and millions of human beings in this country that have to work beyond physical capacity to survive and acquire basic goods and services. We should oppose that and recognize that as a problem, even if it is not a majority. I don't really understand the sort of intellectual and moral limitations in being able to understand this. This is another great little classic of Ben Shapiro. I guess it just shows you when you talk fast.
The same thing is like the idea that you could just.
Oh yes,
presumably
it's the same logic.
It's the same logic. Like you'd have to move to a different community, presumably. Like you think about all the different. Like we're worried about the right wing starting to speak to these communities in the middle America that are getting hollowed out. Well, yeah. What are you going to do? Move away thousands of miles from your family.
Well, this is why someone like Tucker Carlson is
away.
more formidable than Shapiro, because that is what Shapiro's got. But anyways, here's Shapiro.
So it depends on what they have a doctorate in. Right, so you're right. There are a lot of climate scientists and climatologists who have said that global warming is an absolute fact, and anthropogenic global warming is an absolute fact. They have very different measurements as to how large that effect is going to be. There is a broad range among climatologists, as far as I can tell, among how much the climate is going to actually change and what is the direct impact of carbon emissions on that, given the fact that for the last 15 years there has been no global warming. The single largest study of global warming that was done in Britain does not involve killing off millions of human beings. No. But this is I agree, but the problem is that if you're going to make, maybe you're wrong about climate change denial, but here's the solution that you're ignoring. Where's the solution that's being ignored? Right? I'm sorry, it's not Holocaust denial. The use of the language denier.
Sorry, this is a longer clip.
Okay, but basically this is the infamous clip where he said, even if I stipulated that you were right about anything and you had beachfront property and it flooded, well, you can just sell it. So we all remember that classic bit of the ferocious, precise intellect of Ben Shapiro. All right, we got to take a brief break. We're going to come back with Vijay Prashad on the Majority Report. Report. Michael Brooks here. Joining us now is Vijay Prashad. He's the director of the Tricontinental Institute, chief editor of LeftWord Books, and the chief correspondent at Globetrotter. Vijay, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
So, Vijay, can we start by discussing what's been happening in Kashmir, the moves of the BJP government to accelerate troop presence in Kashmir, and also the tearing of the Indian constitution with regards to Kashmir's autonomy. Can you kind of historicize this for us? What has been the long-term situation in Kashmir? How and why is this an escalation? And then maybe also incorporate Pakistani and Chinese responses to this.
Thanks, Michael. That's a very easy thing to say. The first thing I think that needs to be recognized is the situation in Kashmir today is part of the unresolved business of the partition of India in 1947 by the British. I mean, the British hastened the timetable of their departure after World War II and sent a barrister, a lawyer, Sir Cyril Radcliffe, to draw a line between the two new states of India and Pakistan, and then the British sort of wrapped it up and went home. It was extraordinarily, rapid pace of events in India and Pakistan. So the state of Kashmir was a monarchy. It was a princely state. And people may not know that about half of the Indian landmass was actually not directly governed by the British, but was governed through these princely states. And so the Maharaja of Kashmir at the time of partition was not willing to join either India or Pakistan. at which point events hastened and some irregular troops entered Kashmir from Pakistan. The Indian government went and said, look, quickly join us so we can send in the military, and the king did this. I mean, he joined India basically under duress. But the Indian government promised two different things. One was that there would be a plebiscite in Kashmir, which was now divided between India and Pakistan. But they said there'll be a plebiscite very soon. This was pushed by the United Nations as well. That means the people of Kashmir were to be given the right to vote for their future. The second thing the Indian government did in the Constitution of 1950 and through a presidential order in 1954 was that Kashmir, for now, would have autonomy in Article 370 and Article 35A. Now, why did I say for now? Because if you're going to give the people a plebiscite, a chance to chart their own path forward, these provisions in the Constitution were basically temporary until there would be a plebiscite. But nonetheless, because there's not been a plebiscite, the special status of Kashmir has remained from 1950 and 54 till today. Suddenly, the Indian government, really quite suddenly, on the 5th of August, decided to rip up Article 370 and 35A, which removes the special status of Kashmir. And now, having done this, we have to understand the context. There are two important things to look at. Firstly, the right-wing government, the BJP government, has had since the 1940s the agenda of somehow just absorbing Kashmir, and since the 1950s of cutting these two provisions in the Constitution. So for them, this is nothing new. Mm-hmm. When they won a large mandate in the election this year, it was clear they wanted to do something quite spectacular. Their base, which has really substantially grown in India over the years, has been itching for this. So there's a popular mandate in India for the scrapping of Article 370 and 35A. But in order to do this, they had to reconcile that popular mandate in India with deep resentment of this inside Kashmir. So just before they announced this in Parliament on the 5th of August, 35,000 paramilitary troops were sent into Kashmir. The troop strength of the Indian military in Kashmir is over 500,000. It's probably the most highly militarized place on the planet. The internet was shut off. The assembly, the state government's assembly had already been dissolved in November of last year, but local politicians were arrested. The media was entirely silenced. So Kashmir had no role in its own future when this happened in Parliament on August 5th. And shamefully, many centrist parties joined with the right in voting for scrapping Article 370 and 35A. So that's the, as it were, domestic context of the situation. There's, of course, as you said, an international context. Over the last 10 years or so, the Chinese have developed a project called the Belt and Road Initiative, which runs across Eurasia into Africa and parts of South America. It's quite an incredible project, that has linked the Chinese coastal cities on the South China Sea with Europe directly by rail and road through Iran, through substantial parts of West Asia. But in South Asia, in the last 2 or 3 years, the Chinese have developed two projects, two so-called corridors. One into Nepal, which was signed in 2017, and then a $46 billion corridor, which went directly into Pakistan, all the way to a port city in the Pakistani province of Balochistan, which is called Gwadar. This development by China has rattled the Indian government to some extent, but it also, has very much rattled the United States government. And the US government has been putting pressure on India not to participate in the Belt and Road Initiative. And it's quite clear that this Indian government, the right-wing government, being a kind of subordinate ally of the United States, towed the line and hasn't, done any kind of move to, join either the Belt and Road or to even, find a way for India to plug into that. I mean, it's an enormous infrastructural project. So there was a sense that the Chinese, Pakistanis, Nepalis, etc., in that region near Kashmir had some sort of, expansion of their project. The right-wing Indian government basically wanted to exert itself in the border regions, so they not only violated the constitution by scrapping 370 and 35A, but they, took the state of Jammu and Kashmir, abolished it, and brought that entire region, which is the size of the United Kingdom, under the direct control of New Delhi. So they have sort of centralized rule over that important border province.
When we talk about the Pakistani response, what is the distinction? There's how much autonomy does Imran Khan have as a prime minister, or is he really essentially a conduit for the intelligence and military service in Pakistan? And what is their sort of position here, both, I guess, in terms of their own sense of historical aggrievement and even things going back to Bangladesh in the early 70s, but also their own strategic calculations in terms of wanting to have some type of presence in Kashmir for their own ability to wage proxy war or counterweight India?
Well, the thing is that it's hard to say whether Imran Khan has autonomy from the military or not. This is a matter of rumors. People suggest that his victory in the election was entirely because the military pushed him forward. So, maybe he's the man of the military, maybe he's not. He's been making some noises after this move about genocide in Kashmir and so on, which, is what one would have expected whoever had been the prime minister in Pakistan. In other words, Nawaz Sharif would have said the same thing. Even, Parvez Musharraf would have said the same thing, former military man who was the prime. So I don't think it really matters who is the head of government in Pakistan. All of them would have said the same thing. They would have said this is a violation of Kashmir and so on. But there's actually something underneath this that was reported by Suhasini Haidar in the Hindu newspaper, which I want to point out. After Imran Khan met with Donald Trump, some statements were made, which I know Suhasini writes about it, and I can confirm it, was rattled the Indian government a great deal. What were these statements? What happened was that Mr. Trump has been eager to set a peace deal in Afghanistan, even if it means the Afghan Taliban comes back to power in Kabul. He's very eager to pull the US troops out. So one of the pieces of this is that there will be some sort of peace agreement in Afghanistan, and there will be a peace agreement that actually favors Pakistan. This is very important. Afghanistan not only has been part of the Cold War, let's say in the earlier period between the USSR and the US, in the more recent period, the United States against so-called terrorism and so on. But there's also another factor, which is Afghanistan has been part of a mini Cold War between India and Pakistan. Now, what is this mini Cold War? You will know that the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan has never been delimited. It's a contested border. In fact, Afghanistan hadn't recognized the state of Pakistan. So for many years, the Pakistanis had their own agenda inside Afghanistan. They backed the Taliban in the 90s and so on, hoping to have a friendly government in Kabul. At the same time, the Indians know this is a soft spot for the Pakistanis and have backed the opposite faction. So, right after the fall of the Taliban, the government that came of Hamid Karzai was very much looked towards India. He had studied in India, he had friends in India and so on. So the question of Afghanistan is a sensitive one. And when the US government, after meeting Imran Khan, said that we want a peace deal in Afghanistan, and there was a suggestion that the Taliban would be allowed to come back to power, this was a concern in New Delhi. Secondly, in that press conference, Mr. Trump said, and we'll move on to Kashmir. In that way that Trump says things, where it's all easy to solve. Today he said, she will solve the thing in Hong Kong. It's just by magic wand that you can solve contradictions. So he said, we'll move on to Kashmir. This very much alerted the Indian government. And I think the timetable for their very rapid move in this undemocratic way to basically seize, put the iron fist down on Kashmir, the timetable was hastened by the press conference between Imran Khan and Trump, the statement about Afghanistan and that very casual statement about Kashmir.
That's great. And Vijay, just please make sure to stick close to the mic, because when you do, you sound crystal clear, and we get less echo. So I guess before we move on, because we also need to touch on Iran and Brazil, I'll internationalize it again in a second. But what is the presence of the Indian left at this point? We know that the last elections were a real consolidation of the far right in India. And we also know that the Congress Party, the prime opposition, we wouldn't consider to be a left party. However, maybe it would be fair to say that despite all of their own contradictions, limitations, and their own actually very bloody history at certain points, they were able to hold a certain, to some degree, some notion of Indian pluralism in place, going back to Nehru's kind of liberal conceptions. And then there's an Indian left presence. I mean, I think a lot of people have known that Kerala has been governed for most of its history by, or some significant parts of its history, by the Communist Party, and it's achieved incredible social gains in that state relative to not even just India, but even globally in some areas, is my understanding. Where, I guess, in general, what is the sort of main opposition positions in India right now? And to what extent is there still a serious left presence, or has it all been relatively marginalized?
So the first thing to say is that the communist parties, of which there are a few, and they remain strong in terms of their mass movements. The main communist party, the CPIM, it leads a coalition government in Kerala even now. And there are hundreds of millions of people in mass organizations of the communist left. So communist left still exists. But I think to the point here, it was the communist left that was the only one who roundly criticized the Modi government for what it did in Kashmir, and took to the streets as well on August 7th. So, and by the way, at the same time, communist left plus some independent leftists traveled to Kashmir between the 9th and 13th of August, returned to Delhi. Yesterday at the Press Club of India gave a press conference where they basically summarized the situation as democracy is being murdered in Kashmir. So the left has taken a very strong position, and I would say, against public opinion on this case, because, the left is not going to tail public opinion. This is something people need to pay attention to, that, that is why sometimes you become weaker. You're not willing to be an opportunist. You have a longer term perspective. You have a perspective about minority rights and so on. It's not popular always to stand up for, minority populations and so on. So the left has been tarred with the brush of being anti-national. I think this is a serious issue around the world, where people who stand up for human rights, stand up for justice, they are disparaged. Mr. Trump routinely calls the press, for instance, the enemies of the people. I mean, this is the same sort of attitude. If you don't stand with the majority, then you're a problem. You're a virus. They use quite, repellent metaphors to describe people who simply will not stand by the majority for its sake. So that's a big problem for the left, that we should recognize that it's a global problem. Yep. The Congress Party, unfortunately, vacillates because it has, part of its agenda is with this sort of broader secular, as you said, pluralistic India, but it also vacillates because at times it will run with the hounds, it will go in the opposite direction it will say, well, we need to be with popular opinion. And I think that's quite shameful. We see that a lot with liberalism around the world. Right. People saying, well, I'm against what Trump is doing at the US-Mexico border. On the other hand, immigration is a problem. Right. No, I'm afraid that's wrong. Immigration is not a problem.
Right. So, and even just maybe just one brief history lesson that we can correlate. I mean, I like recognizing how compromised liberalism is, all of this, at the same time not drawing a false equivalency. I would certainly prefer a Congress government in India. I'd prefer a democratic government, generically to Trump. However, at the same time, it's so important to be honest and clear about these things. And I always remember, the pogroms against the Sikhs after the assassination of Indira Gandhi. I mean, that was, quite personally sort of, overseen by a Congress Party government.
Oh, I was a young person in India then. I come from a Sikh family. This is entirely personal for me. Yes. But, I don't bear any animus towards the Congress as an entity. I think it's a contradictory entity. Look, in our countries, all of them, all around the world, we are seeing basically the disappearance of a robust, strong, liberal social democracy. Your electorate is entirely polarized. On the one side, you've got this repellent, terrible right wing. On the other side, you have a left which is weak because it stands for the truth. We need that middle ground to ally with. And that's just not available. If you look at the US Democratic Party, you have people like, Omar Iram, you have Rashida Tlaib, you have, all these other people on the left. And even in their own party, their speaker is not always able to be in line with them. And I'm not saying they need to agree, but at least they should have an attitude of solidarity with each other. Right. And even that is not available.
Right. Precisely. And that is actually why I think it's so important that we get to Lula in Brazil in a bit, because that's such an important model. But before we move to Iran for a couple of minutes, I mean, what everybody always goes to, and in some ways maybe this is our own international selfishness, that anytime something happens in South Asia, there's all these incredible intricacies that implicate so many people and such dynamic politics in India, Pakistan, Afghanistan. But it always sort of ends up at some point of like, is this going to escalate to the point where there's some type of actual serious military exchange between India and Pakistan, which would obviously, have ramifications for the rest of the world. What is your read on the appetite of the Indian and Pakistani governments in terms of actually allowing this to escalate beyond the crisis it already is?
I don't think there's any sense that there will be a war. Okay. I mean, the Pakistan General High Command has basically said so. And I also think it's important to understand that here the Chinese have changed the situation in South Asia. The appetite is much greater for greater infrastructure than for war. I think that this is quite a significant qualitative change in very many parts of Asia. I feel like this is what is going to turn the clock in Afghanistan as well. The moment people in Afghanistan see that the Chinese are going to show up and build big roads and connect Afghanistan with the rest of the world, that they will say, well, maybe this is a better idea. I mean, I just want to put forward that it's been a long time in parts of Asia. It's been far too long where there's been no uniting project that is not, something to do with war. And the Chinese have, for all their flaws, put that project forward.
Right. With Iran, we've seen the Trump administration tear up the deal, even though every observer, including our own U.S. State Department and so on, confirmed that Iran was following the deal down to the T. The Europeans were angry, but there isn't necessarily any sort of muscle behind that anger. And now we've seen this kind of cycle of tension in terms of these ship seizures. What do you see as the dynamic between the United States, Iran, and Europe right now?
It's related to our previous conversation about India, because again here, the Europeans are a test case of spinelessness. The Europeans know that the deal that was, after a great set of compromises by all sides, the deal that was struck in 2015 is a very good deal. The Europeans know that. They tell you that quite openly. Secondly, the Europeans know that the Iranians have not violated the deal. And as you say, so does the US State Department. In fact, so does the CIA. Everybody knows the deal was not violated. Thirdly, the Europeans are desperate for Iranian oil. There are other main avenues for oil or natural gas from Russia, from Libya. These have been compromised by sanctions, by very stupid wars. So the Europeans are desperate for Iranian oil. They tried to create a mechanism to be able to pay for Iranian oil around US sanctions. So for these three reasons, the Europeans know the deal was good, Europeans know the Iranians haven't violated the deal, and the Europeans are desperate for oil. You would think that in a rational world, European social democracy and so on would stand up and say, that the United States leaving this deal is ridiculous. I mean, they would come beyond the United States and be sharply critical. When the US government decided to sanction Javad Zarif, the foreign minister of Iran, in a normal world, you would have expected the foreign ministers of Europe and the European Union's foreign chief, for now, Federica Mogherini, you would have expected all of them to come out in public and said, this is outrageous. All that happened was they released a very mild statement saying, we will continue to meet Mr. Zarif. Really, is that the best you can do? I mean, this spinelessness of the center is what is crippling the world today. We need to say this. It's easy to say, where's the left? What's the left not doing? This is not a problem of the left. This is a problem of a center that has been dissolved into jelly.
So what was the rationale? I mean, just elaborate on the sanctions against Jawad Zarif, because that is really the height of the aggressiveness and the absurdity of the Trump line and the spinelessness of the Europeans. I mean, I'm not making a value judgment here. I don't want sanctions against anybody. It was a great deal. Things are moving forward and so on. But when someone when someone comes forward and they say, oh, well, we sanctioned some, commander in the Republican, in the Republican Guard or whatever. Okay, this makes inside a certain logic. This is sort of part of the kind of conflict zones in the Middle East. Javad Zarif, no one has done more to try to soothe all of these tensions and move forward diplomatically.
Well, Mr. Zarif was educated almost entirely in the United States. He speaks fluent English. He's an extremely bright and well-prepared person. Let's just put that out there. You need to have Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on your show. You need to ask him why he's jealous of Mr. Zarif. I asked somebody in the U.S. State Department, what's the story here? Because I wrote a piece about this. Well, he told me, look, let's be frank. Zarif has been doing the U.S. talk shows, and the Trump administration is frustrated. Mm-hmm. They can't stand the fact that this guy is so good. And, partly, let's say it, he's right in what he's saying. It's not just that he's a good, spin doctor. He has truth on his side. I mean, it's not only that he's a good messenger, his message is good. And Trump apparently and Pompeo just can't stand that. In a monarchy, sometimes you have to look at the caprice of the monarch. You don't have to understand structure and, you don't have to understand the context. It's just the monarch's attitude. That's how I like to read the Saudi Arabian situation, for instance. There's a lot of internal bizarreness. When the monarch says something, you have to do it. I mean, there's no checks and balance. In some ways, this Trump-Pompeo, policy on Zarif feels monarchical. There's no rational explanation to sanction the foreign minister of a country who's willing to negotiate with you. You can't on the one side say, we want to negotiate a better deal, and then sanction the only person who's able to negotiate this deal. The supreme leader of Iran made a very good comment. He said, you want to negotiate? Zarif is the only person you're going to negotiate with. There's nobody else. He said that openly.
Right.
So the fact of this sanction on Zarif indicates one of two things. One, this government is totally comical, farcical, doesn't understand the way in which diplomacy works. They are being motivated, in a sense, by jealousy or whatever. That's one. Second thing is, actually, this is their path to war. They really don't want to negotiate anything. That eventually, when the timetable, perhaps an electoral timetable suits them, they'll do some sort of bombing raid on Iran. It's only one or the other explanation, perhaps both. But I don't see a third explanation.
So what can slow that timetable down or reverse it? Is it dependent on the feckless Europeans? Certainly Bernie Sanders has at least been very aggressive in terms of domestic leadership and trying to bring this back to Congress as an example, as well as also saying quite clearly that any type of military exchange with Iran would obviously be an absolute catastrophe. What can slow this or stop this?
Well, I'm not confident about the Europeans. I mean, they were not able to build the spine to deal with a pack of lies around Iraq. I doubt very much that this is going to be any different. That's the one side. Secondly, inside American politics, there's a serious problem. I mean, whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans, neither seem to acknowledge and appreciate the fact that Iran has the legal right to process uranium. You know, it has a legal nuclear energy policy. Now, I am against nuclear energy 100%, but my opinion is hardly relevant. The United States government continues to develop nuclear energy. France, you know, basically exists on nuclear energy. Until recently, Germany as well. So nuclear energy is a legitimate and legal, procedure, legitimate policy, and so on. And the Iranians, through their membership in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, through their established position with the International Atomic Energy Agency and so on, they have a right to nuclear energy. And they are processing around 4.5% of uranium, not even close to the 90%, which is needed for a nuclear bomb. But in the US, in US political culture, any enrichment by Iran is seen as illegal. And I think this is really the nub of the problem. I don't see a Democrat willing to come out there in public and say Iran has a right to process uranium for its nuclear energy project. And unless that takes place, there is no long-term solution to this problem. You know, what gives a country like the United States the right to tell another country what it can do or not do if what it is doing is illegal? This is something that Americans seriously need to think about.
You just got back from Brazil, and I've certainly used both of my platforms extensively to talk about the political imprisonment of Lula. I think that matters in a variety of areas quite significantly, both for Brazil and the world. So I want to get specifically to that. But first, just your broader impressions of what's taking place now in Brazil, both obviously the assault on the Amazon, on labor unions and so on, the manifestation of authoritarianism there under Bolsonaro, but also the recent setbacks for Bolsonaro and Moro and the sort of counterweight in Brazil. What's the feeling on the ground there?
Well, firstly, it has to be said that if you think Trump is a comical character, Bolsonaro is 100 Trumps. I mean, there's an element of ridiculousness about his presidency. Even the Brazilian elite, I think, is quite embarrassed by him.
Yes.
They would like his policies. They just don't like how embarrassing he is, the kinds of statements and the sort of things he believes. I think that's important to put out there. Similar, in a way, to the US situation, where, the elite very much seem to be in line with the things Trump is doing, but they just don't like Trump's personality. I think there's something even more grotesque about Bolsonaro to this elite section. But Bolsonaro as a person and his policies has deeply polarized Brazil, and polarized it in a terrible way. Polarized it to the extent where genuinely the health of the planet is threatened. There are two major carbon sinks in the planet. One is the Amazon, and the second is the island of Papua, which is divided between West Papua, now held by Indonesia, and by Papua New Guinea. Bolsonaro has basically opened the Amazon for business. This is great for Canadian, Australian, American, Swiss companies. People don't like to recognize the kind of companies, the national origin of the companies that are destroying the Amazon. But they're not so far away from the good liberals of Canada. Half the mining companies in the world are basically headquartered in Canada. You'll have Justin Trudeau for all his charisma, but behind him are some quite terrible mining companies. At the University of Toronto, one of the most distinguished institutions is the Munk Center for International Studies. I've been there a number of times, but the name Munk should set off, bells in South America, because he was the head of one of the worst of these mining companies. In fact, Mr. Munk, is the one who started writing quite feverishly when Hugo Chavez came to power in Venezuela, calling him a dictator, largely because Chavez threatened Canadian mining interests inside Venezuela. So Bolsonaro is certainly, opened the Amazon for business of these multinational corporations. And this is, I think, created some pause inside Brazil. Obviously, there are labor unions who are greatly upset and so on. But I think the destruction of the Amazon has even raised eyebrows among people who sort of sat in the middle and weren't willing to take a stand against Bolsonaro. I think there is now the temperature rising of genuine concern that the activities in the Amazon are threatening the planet. I think this is really the soft underbelly of the neoliberal project inside Brazil.
I've always thought that one of the reasons that the imprisonment of Lula was so crucial was that the uncritical coverage and embracing of Lava Jato by the global media class and by liberals and so on, and this corruption rhetoric, which has been used by the global far right in a not in terms of understanding systems of corruption, but in this personalized campaigns of saying that particular leaders, almost always on the left, are corrupt, was the sort of handmaiden of this new rise of authoritarianism. And Lava Jato was so perfect because this uncritical embrace of this sprawling investigation, which was weaponized essentially primarily to focus on the Workers' Party. And now we know from all of the Intercept disclosures that, of course, it was politically motivated, and also that there were specifically politicians on the right and in the center that they went easy on or ignored because they perceived them as being politically aligned with them. And juxtaposing that with the fact that Lula was both such a successful leader but also such a conciliatory one. Is your sense that sort of the microcosm of the Lava Jato Lula story in Brazil is sort of that type of stand-in for understanding these dynamics globally?
Well, first, I think let's quickly say that when Mr. Lula was in power in Brazil,
yes,
it was a double-faced agenda. On the one side, Mr. Lula decided to compromise with the banks. Mm-hmm. That was early with his letter to the bankers and so on. So he was never going to pursue a far-left agenda.
Right.
Secondly, importantly, he produced one of the most robust social democratic agendas in a big country in our period. You know, Brazil is much bigger than a place like Venezuela. And the two parts of that project that I think need emphasis. One, he basically, through his policies, almost eradicated hunger in Brazil. Incredible for a country that has never had a revolution. I mean, after all, Brazil was created not by some, uprising inside Brazil, but because the father essentially donated Brazil to his son. I mean, that's hardly a revolution. And secondly, Brazil just, got rid of slavery just a few days ago.
Yep.
So in that context, he was able to tackle the question of hunger. I think that's quite significant. And even the United Nations said that their scheme, the zero hunger policy, has got to be emulated. Secondly, Lula opened up universities, opened a whole bunch of public universities around the country, basically opening the door to working class, rural, black, indigenous students to come and study at the highest level. And they basically came in with, ability to come and study with government funds. I mean, why is this important? A whole generation was able to be educated that came from deprived backgrounds, and not just primary education, they got college education. So even though there were great limitations in Mr. Lula's agenda, he pushed a couple of projects at least, and I'm just emphasizing two of them, that built him up as an enormously popular person. And it's unfortunate that his successor, Dilma Rousseff, came to power when commodity prices fell. She tried to push some of the same schemes, but not with the same robustness, which is why after the horrible presidency of Mr. Temer, much more corrupt than Lula, proven to be more corrupt than Lula. And Lula, we are not sure whether he was corrupt in the first place. But this man, genuinely corrupt. In the time of Temer, when the next election was coming up, Lula was put as the candidate of the Workers' Party, and by all polls showed that he would have won maybe even in the first round of the voting. Mm-hmm. So he had to be removed from power. I mean, you got to understand, when you look at the Intercept conversations, you look at Moro talking to the prosecutor and so on. I mean, behind all that is the fear that this man could become the president again. And, he may not have challenged the banks. He may not have done this and that and the 100 things you can say about him. but he certainly improved the well-being of Brazilians. And they loved him, and they would have elected him without a problem, which means the left would have come back to power in Brazil. This would have been so significant, for South America. Just the other day, there was a primary election in Argentina where Mr. Macri's party was defeated, and Dilma Rousseff sent out a tweet immediately saying that this primary election in Argentina is a light at the end of the tunnel for South America. Imagine if Lula had won the election. It wouldn't have been a light at the end of the tunnel. It would have been a light over South America.
Precisely. And I just, in the last couple of minutes, I just want to say, I think it's extremely important that, especially in the Brazilian case, but elsewhere, that we make a distinction when we talk about corruption, because I think that just as with the banks, when Lula came to power in 2003, there wasn't a historical or global context for him to do much different than what he did, as far as I understand. And he still, as you said, delivered these incredible gains for the Brazilian people. And part of that was making peace with Brazilian politics, the Brazilian banks, foreign investors, and so on. So I think it's quite important when we sort of juxtapose these corruption questions, and we could see that, well, there's the actual case against Lula that they put him in jail for is farcical, right? It's modest improvements on a middle-class home that he was never even proven to have lived in and spent maybe 1 or 2 visits at, right? And that more broadly, if someone is head of a government and has already made enough sort of innate compromise in order to govern, that might mean that they are involved in sort of broad, systemic, generic corruption. That certainly does not mean, and I think what most people think in their heads when they hear the word corruption, that, okay, someone took several $1 million out of a fund for clean water and stuck it in a Swiss bank account. There's nothing like that on Lula. And I just think it's quite important because so many right-wing leaders, even Donald Trump, very effectively said, drain the swamp. And in his case, he was talking about people like the Clintons who do have, these are no Lulas by any stretch of the imagination. But the right has been able to use a simplified, dumbed down corruption discourse to as political lawfare against the left, politically, particularly in Brazil. And it just seems to me that we need to have a much smarter understanding about precisely what corruption is and isn't. We saw the same dynamic in Argentina. The main argument that people like Macri had was against Cristina de Kirchner, who's running as vice president in that election. She's a former president. And they also, sort of asserted corruption allegations against her as well. So I think we can't separate those threads.
Well, in fact, to come back to India, the BJP first won the election in the previous Lok Sabha with the idea that the Congress was corrupt. Corruption is a very empty word by itself. It is just bandied about. I'm not sure people think about what it means. Generally, what I think people suggest is, I am not doing well in my life. It appears that some people are doing well, and therefore there is corruption. Corruption stands in for a better understanding of how capitalism works. That is why people feel like, corruption is a real thing. Corruption is a real thing, but it's not this sort of personal corruption you imagine. It's the system that is corrupted wealth towards a few people away from you. But we don't have this deep understanding of how the system works. So what you get is, you get the media just picking on people. Let's take apartments. Lula is said to have had an apartment, very modest apartment by the ocean. Let's take apartments. One of his predecessors, very famous president of Brazil, has an enormously expensive apartment in a major avenue in Paris. Why isn't that being investigated? The current president of Ecuador, a great friend of the United States now, Mr. Moreno, has a very fancy apartment in Madrid, in Spain. That was revealed in some papers that were leaked earlier this year. Suddenly these are not taken up as cause célèbre of corruption. So corruption itself, on the one hand, is misleading because it basically gets at the problems in the world, but then deflects from the problems. You don't get a broad structural understanding of why there's inequality in the world. So that's one of the problems. Second one is it's weaponized. It's used against certain politicians and not others. And it's this weaponization of corruption that I think we should be very careful about. I mean, it's obviously true that the Clintons are corrupt. But what about the head of the Senate? What about that gentleman? Comes from the state of Kentucky. Supposedly had a modest bank account years ago. Now has an enormous wealth. How did they get wealthy? That's also a form of corruption, perhaps. But there is no weaponization of the idea of corruption against him. This is very strategically done, and that should make us extraordinarily suspicious.
Right, precisely. And just to echo that gentleman Cardozo, who has the apartment in Paris, some of the Lavajato leaks show at the very least that I believe Moro's saying, well, this is a guy that we shouldn't look at quite as much because he's politically sympathetic to us. And so we have precisely that dynamic. And then all of a sudden a person like Lula, where there's actually nothing, there are no fancy apartments or secret bank accounts or anything like that. We have this silly, modest apartment deal, which doesn't have any physical evidence. But then, this sort of broader swirl of accusations, none of which have been proven, and the ones that that may exist have to do with just making compromises with a structural corrupt system, as you mentioned before, which would require an understanding of wealth concentration of Brazil and the role of global capital in Brazil. And then all of a sudden we're in a totally different politics.
Exactly. And that politics is what we have to, bring into the present. I mean, part of the problem with politics is that the context to have a sober conversation is not available. People often say, oh my God, we live in these horrible times, these dark times and so on. Well, I agree with you. But part of being in this dark time is that what I think of as a rational discussion about politics, the context for that is just not available. I mean, I'm not even talking about the fact that if you go on a mainstream television program, they don't understand what you're saying, But what I want to emphasize is that they don't understand what you're saying. You sound crazy. You sound crazy, not because you're crazy, but because the context for that conversation is just not available. If I want to go on a television channel and talk about, the structural problems in our world, the problems of, as you said, structural corruption and so on, I don't think they have 2 minutes for that. They just sort of brush you off and say, let's get back to the real question. Is Lula guilty or not? And that's not a question, man. I mean, I've been on a lot of media where that's the question they ask you. Answer the question, is Lula guilty or not? And if you say, well, he's not guilty, then they're like, well, why is he in prison? I mean, this is not a conversation.
Right.
It's an interrogation.
Right. That stops us from actually thinking out the actual context. Well, Vijay Prashad, I just always appreciate your time so much. I hope we speak again very soon. I feel like it's been too long a gap, man.
Yeah, let's talk more often.
Okay, great. Vijay Prashad, director of the Tricontinental Institute, chief editor of LeftWord Books, and chief correspondent at Globetrotter. Check out all of his work. We'll have a link to his Twitter page as well. Vijay, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Take care. All right, folks. Let's see. Become a member of the Majority Report today. Majority. Can you take it down, Matt? I'm going to call into the system. Thank you. Majority.fm/become a member. That's how this show happens. Check out justcoffee.coop, fair trade tea, coffee, or chocolate. Let's do, since we're running late, let's do thumbnail pitches. Let's do 10, 15 seconds each. Matt, what do we got?
Literary Hangover we did for a couple of patron episodes before we go to Chicago. So coming up this weekend, it's going to be George Orwell's Shooting an Elephant, which is actually a rather problematic essay where we get into Orwell, maybe not so clearly good of an anti-imperialist as people like Christopher Hitchens might suggest. We get into some racial, basically racist attitudes and representations and what it means, and to a certain extent it's defensible in terms of rhetorical, like he literally was a cop and speaking as a imperial cop, and that's going to be racist, but nowhere else does he represent. So we get into problematic Orwell in the next literary hangover.
Sweet. Jamie.
This week on the Antifada, we have on Simone Norman, actress, comedian, and commie organizer in DSA, for a bit of a chat. I talked about the DSA convention in Atlanta, including the resolutions on open borders, sex work decriminalization, and Bernie or Bust, as well as the manufactured drama that was Clapgate. I also talked about the Close the Camps action in New York over the weekend and how you can get involved. And then we discussed the uses and abuses of irony on the left. Check it out. Also, we have a bonus coming out on Friday for our patrons in which Simone discusses, for the first time, the Praxis video that broke the internet. Stay tuned.
I feel like Sam on that one. It's like, I don't know all these things.
Oh, you didn't see the video.
I actually did not see that video.
I'll play it for you later. It's funny.
Okay. On TMBS on Tuesday, we talked with Elaine Yu. She's a correspondent for AFP in Hong Kong about the context for the uprisings in Hong Kong. Then Brianna Joy Gray, press secretary for the Bernie Sanders campaign, former TMBS regular in her journalist days. We talked about media bias against Bernie, how that campaign looks on the ground. And we did a look at ideology as a filter for understanding the presidential candidates. And when someone tells you they're not ideological, why that is the most powerful statement of ideology possible. This weekend, Liz Franzik, who's the co-host of the TrueAnon podcast, joins me to talk about an actual strategic response to Tucker Carlson. That's for patrons, patreon.com/TMBS, Michael Brooks Show on YouTube. We'll see you in the fun half, on the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you can imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Almost says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
I am a total cunt.
Can we bring back DJ Danergy's song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danergy.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break for people.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder. I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are
psych. Fuck em. Almost says what? What? Almost says what?
Hell of a lot of bank. 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 Hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black.
See Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on! Fuck em. Fuck things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday! Happy birthday to me, Jew boy!
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are back. Africans are black.
Come on! Come on! Someone needs to pay the price.
sacrifice or blasphemy around here.
I am a total
Pussy.
Busy. Welcome to the fun half. Let's take a call out of the gate, since there's no doubt we will not get to all calls. You're calling from a Skype. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, I'm Marco Machine. Can you hear me? Hi, this is Matthew calling from London. Can you hear me?
Go one more time.
This is Matthew calling from London. Can you hear me?
Matthew from London. I can hear you now. What's on your mind, Matthew?
Fantastic. I just want to let you know that I'm listening to your podcast lying down because I'm recovering from several high-level ideas.
Yeah, definitely. Vijay Prashad will bring the high-level important ideas. What else is on your mind, bud?
Yeah. What I had to say is I know you may be interested in going on this podcast, but I just wanted to get your current thoughts on the state of Joe Rogan. I had wanted to call in and chat about his last interview with Eric Weinstein, which was basically, I think he's the brother of the Weinstein from Evergreen University. It's the one who works with Peter Thiel. And basically...
Yeah, I watched that. Sorry. I think Sam did a segment on it. I got to tell you, man, I just think...
Well, I'm a specter.
Joe, people should, not only should people probably worry less about that show, but take some W's that are coming from that show right now. Like Bernie's appearance on that show was a major success. It's great. Cornel West was on.
Yeah, it's a huge one. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I all of the criticisms still stand, and
Weinstein sucks.
Weinstein, oh boy, not
both
good.
of them.
Both of them.
No,
but do you have anything else? You have anything else besides content reactions to other content?
Yeah, sorry.
No worries.
The thing I just wanted to say was obviously it's great you're covering Kashmir. It's a real problem. I always tend to look at these things from a military viewpoint, and it's really scary because it looks like these people are Pakistan and India for various reasons. Might be having a hot war, and they've both got nuclear weapons. So
did you hear what Vijay said about that?
De-escalates.
Let's hope it de-escalates. Thanks for the call. You're calling from a 573 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Adam from Missouri. First-time caller, long-time lover.
Well, welcome, Adam. I return the love. What's on your minds?
So I had kind of like a two-parter, but one thing I was wondering, I kind of tried calling the other days, hope to get Sam on a rant or something, but unfortunately.
So call back for Sam.
You're stuck with us.
Call
Sorry.
back for Sam. That's a very bad way to start a call. Bad stuff.
But no, my question was, I don't know when this comes into usually to the political talk, but the talk of vice presidents nomination, like who they're going to use as vice presidents. When does that usually start? And what do you guys think about that?
Usually they're announced after the nomination mostly. You thought Sam would get into a rant about that?
No, not exactly that one. No.
All right.
You're lucky that Sam's not here, because he
he
probably would have directed you to letmegooglethatforyou.com.
Because I think that Bernie Sanders should.
My question was.
All right, what's the question? But don't worry about that until that's not what's top of the docket right now. All right, what's the second one, buddy?
Okay.
Let's see how this one goes.
So the idea is about making housing. So we know that malls are basically closing down or basically become dead space, or are they being used for anything in particular? Or could we use them to have the government come in?
There's a huge amount of empty spaces that could be converted into housing. Definitely. Thanks for the call, man. All right.
Expropriate the malls.
Expropriate a lot of stuff. All right. This is a new segment that we're going to do from time to time called Blind Item, where we have not seen this. We're going to listen or watch and respond. It's incredible to watch the wave of fake pseudo-sophisticates who literally... only Alex Jones and pundits on CNN can think that criticizing media monopolies and how that influences coverage is the same as some type of Baroque conspiracy theory. Most of the rest of us are either intuitively grok the obvious, which is that there's self-interest and self-selection, or some of the rest of us have done things like read Manufacturing Consent, which is pretty well-known book. It really shouldn't. I mean, it was plugged in Good Will Hunting, for God's sake. Let's see how Stephen Colbert does with the whole anti-Bernie bias in media story. Let's see. Colbert, who historically is one of the smarter ones. Let's see how he does.
His character was good.
His character was good. Blind item. Let's check it out.
There's also news about Vermont Senator and sentient dryer lint Bernie Sanders. For years, the Bern has been critical of corporate America, especially Amazon CEO and super cool penis Jeff Bezos.
Yuck.
Whoa. Hey ladies, look but don't touch. At a recent event in New Hampshire, Bernie went after Bezos again.
You know, if you look at the Washington Post, which is owned by the wealthiest guy in this country, a guy named Jeff Bezos, Amazon made $10 billion in profit last year. You know how much they paid in taxes? They got it, zero. Any wonder why the Washington Post is not one of my great supporters? I wonder why.
Wait, is that he's stealing Trump's things? Yes, the Jeff Bezos, the Washington Post is, I think, and I'm coining this phrase, fake news said it's a witch hunt. A witch hunt! God bless the United States. Now, Bernie went on.
SMBH.
I don't know. Does this go on much longer? Because this is a great explanation of why so many people are so stupid.
Yeah, what do you say, Brennan?
I think we got to do it.
Keep going.
All right, keep going.
Yeah, because there's like a minute left, and this
is he going to recover? Is he going to recover? Because
it's a blind item, man. Nobody's watching.
All right, halfway in, Stephen Colbert. Never give your heroes the Late Show.
There's that article that came out in Mel magazine earlier this year about how just late night writing rooms are just absolutely dead in the water and just wrote all the time. And this is like, a perfect example.
Embodiment of it. All right.
Let's hear him out, guys.
Colbert's initial contract was for $4.6 million over 3 years. So
he's just getting paid.
All right, let's do this.
I mean, maybe he could spend some of that money on more writers. But.
Maybe he could spend, or order a book from Powell's independent bookstore online called Manufacturing Consent. Go ahead.
Bernie went on to explain why he's worried about corporate media, saying, large corporations own the media in America by and large, and I think there is a framework about how the corporate media focuses on politics. Okay, Bernie, that's ridiculous. I, Stephen Colbert, work for a major corporate media, but I'm free from corporate influence, and I can say whatever I want. Which reminds me, all hail the glorious merger of Viacom and CBS. May it forever bolster our premium content portfolio and position us to span all content categories and demographics, creating eternal value for shareholders. Viacom, CBS, stronger together.
So this is basically a reworking of a Wayne's World joke, which was actually funny in the original Wayne's World movie, where they get sponsors and the whole sight gag is that they're never going to sell out and they're always going to be independent while they hold up different products. And this is so funny because this is like, he's so pure Gen X here, because it's like that double move where it's like, as long as I'm overt, there's nothing to see here. So what I'll do is I'll actually, after making this ridiculous, you have brain worms if you think Sanders and Trump are doing the same thing, but I'll explain it to the people who have trouble comprehending basic things in a minute. But what he's doing there is, after making that ridiculous false equivalency, is saying, like, I'll throw like a slight rhetorical bone to people who have concern about media monopolies, and I'll turn it into this like ultra irony-filled nonsense, which is sort of pulling off a great feat if you take it seriously or if it was in any way funny. Because on one hand, what you're doing is you're basically saying like, hey, look, for one track, you're like, no, I actually get it. That's why I'm going to look like I'm being a shill right now. But actually for most people, and the people who are unable to see the difference between Sanders and Trump, he's doing an extreme caricature of what people have made up and lied that Bernie is saying, which is that it is this linear one-to-one relationship. So very sad blind item. And I just want to say, Donald Trump has never structurally critiqued anything. He's basically said that if the Washington Post does a narrow investigative report and the New York Times exposes how he's a trust fund baby and all of his, various misdeeds, that means they're the enemy of the people because his personality is merged with his base. Bernie Sanders is saying that media monopolies and media concentration of a very small group of people, industries, and oligarchs skews what gets focused on in terms of coverage. And that's why, as an example, you don't get, several years ago in particular, you would never get any, if you want to talk about poverty, it would get zero coverage. So and then more broadly, of course, he's running a campaign which literally threatens the self-interest of those who control the media. And so they don't need to make a call. They don't even need to consciously sort of make a plan. They've already filtered through, in terms of a professional system and an ideological system, a whole infrastructure that's going to be opposed to him and biased against him. This is quite obvious, even on the down to the level of who can afford to do internships at media companies. It ain't working class people.
Nope.
I can assure you.
Absolutely. And Stephen Colbert is also doing something kind of gross here, where he's making fun of the idea that he would be stoked on the CBS Viacom merger and stand to benefit from it, when in fact he very much does. And it's a little bit tone deaf towards all of the employees right now who work at these two companies who are legitimately concerned about layoffs and consolidation.
Right.
So nice one, dude. Way to be a man of the people.
And also just not funny.
Well, Viacom owns Comedy Central, right? So it's not like he hasn't worked with Viacom before. It's like getting the gang back together.
That's right. I guess I don't know if I can deal with this. I've always said that people need to be a lot more strategic. It's not enough to just condemn Tucker Carlson. He knows how to, he's got some cleverness in his game. Adam Carolla doesn't. And this is a good reminder of just like, yeesh. Adam Carolla and Tucker Carlson on why is college worth it? As they sit in front of a Nissan
Nissan Z. These are cool cars. I don't like the Exxon.
I don't like the Exxon
labeling.
sponsorship either. All right, here's of these two, undeniably Tucker Carlson is funnier, without a doubt. And Adam Carolla supposedly is like a lifelong comedian. I don't get this guy. All right, let's watch this.
And I would say drop them off at a business and let them be what they used to call me on the construction site. Start off as a glorified goomper, which is low man on the totem pole. Ooh, can we say low man anymore? No. Low. What? Well, I don't want to use a pejorative here and assign.
I don't know
race
the answer,
or
but
gender.
I know the pronoun is they. That's all I know.
Low they, not on the totem pole because that's cultural appropriation.
Good point.
Low they on the barber pole?
No.
Low they on the flagpole?
No, definitely not on the flagpole, on the utility pole.
Low they on the telephone pole.
I don't get this. Literally,
Oh my
what's going
God.
on?
Well,
What's
they're
going
doing,
on here?
This is like the new update of the "I'm a helicopter" joke, basically.
All right. Well, that's powerful. Right-wing conservatives are getting funnier. And
Waiting
left
for
are getting
Dennis
afraid.
Miller to drop in to make some joke about renaming Death of a Salesman or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. You would need
Willie Low person.
Yeah.
Is gonna kill himself.
Yeah,
man.
Willie
Bop,
Low
bop, bop.
person was triggered by the lack of sales opportunity in the imperially occupied land of the greater Northeast sales region. Bop, bop, bop.
I, for one, am shocked that the great mind behind girls jumping on trampolines has become a lazy reactionary.
Yeah, I'll admit that I'd seen some man shows as a young teenage boy, and for reasons besides Carolla's comedy. But I don't remember ever having any memories of Adam Carolla making me laugh.
That is
especially
actually,
him.
that's a great bit though. Like we're watching like the man show is like 13. And we're just like, I wish they would just get to the trampoline
Yes,
bit
I
because
mean-
Adam Carolla really has significant limitations as a comedian. I don't understand. Howard Stern manages to do bits like this, and he's funny. What's Adam Carolla's problem?
another spilled beer bit? Okay.
Yeah, it's like, okay, I get it. And then when you get a Budweiser, that's an even worse hangover. Thank you, Adam. Can we get to the trampolines now, please? the discerning man show watcher. That was what a split. Kimmel and Carolla, man. No wonder Carolla's so resentful. And no wonder, by the way, talk about being low on the entertainment totem pole relative to your former buddy.
Well, that's always
Kimmel sucks too.
Not a good trajectory.
He's been drinking too much of that Mangria.
Was that a sponsor of his podcast?
No, that was like
He had a branded sangria for men.
Oh my god.
You mentioned drinking.
I think Matt Christman drank it once.
I'm sure he did.
That's an actual thing? Jesus Christ. Yeesh. All right, Leaf Sage. I heard you use the term clown fascism many times. Obviously, this refers to Trump. But I was wondering if you had a broader definition as it pertains to the rise of right-wing governments. Well, I first used that term with regards to Trump when he was running for president.
Yeah, during the campaign.
During the campaign. That's when I first said it. But no, there is an interesting. I think Bolsonaro would definitely fit in that pattern. Boris Johnson would fit into that pattern, and the one. Look, I think it just captures something particular about Trump. But one thing that I would say that is a parallel between Bolsonaro, Trump, and Johnson, even though they're all very different figures in some key respects, is that they were all three treated as media oddities and sources of like bizarre entertainment. So even though like Bolsonaro was in the Brazilian Congress, he would be on TV. I think a Brazilian journalist or talk show host, she kind of apologized. She was like, yeah, we kind of had this guy on. He was an idiot. He would be provocative. Boris Johnson has this whole very carefully cultivated sort of fake spontaneity about him. So I think there's something with these people who actually are very extreme in their politics. They're pure sort of top-down class politics. They're very harmful in their agendas, but they do have something kind of comical and ridiculous about them. So
and a lot of them have those literal like clown wigs of hair too.
They do.
There's another one in Italy whose name escapes me
Salvini?
right now. Yeah, maybe.
No, Salvini doesn't. I don't think Salvini
Maybe
has
different
that
guy.
look. But I like Modi on the other hand. Modi does not have that affect at all. Modi certainly is extremely egotistical and so on, but his affect is very different.
Now that we're post Jeff Sessions and with the William Barr, I was going to say Donald Barr era, we're in the fascism stage. There's clowns around because it's hard to staff, because competent fascists are really hard to come by because they're borderline paradoxical. But clown fascist made a lot. I think it was a lot more fun to say in 2016,
right,
than it is now.
Right, and I think now it's like, to the extent it's true, it's more. It could almost be like a tool of analysis of like what the relationship is with media and the rise of particular personalities,
right?
Basically. Kamut pronounced. I'm not even. This is too complicated. Where does Matt Walsh rank in the list of Matts you've had on the Majority Report? Who is Matt Walsh?
Oh, he's
the sweaty guy that works.
Oh, the guy.
Shapiro.
Well, quite
the
low.
unearned pedant from yesterday.
Quite low.
The nerd who doesn't know anything.
Seb Gorka's worst of both worlds. Seb Gorka's business card: solidarity with everyone in the Bernie campaign, particularly Brianna Joy Gray. On Tuesday night, I watched the two of you on TMBS and immediately opened Twitter afterwards to find her work on My Bernie Story had been smeared. On an unrelated note, does anyone have any movie recommendations where a horse dies? Well, of course, The Godfather.
Yeah, horse doesn't want this smoke. Sorry, you work for Aetna, buddy.
Were some apparently some weird, twerpy, centrist accounts were like really upset about us talking about
I think
this.
a leader of the Center for American Progress thought it was doxing to say that guy was a strategist for major corporations, including healthcare and pharmaceuticals.
Wait a second.
It's on his LinkedIn.
So somebody has an anonymous Twitter account where they constantly sort of allude to their work, at least when I saw it, as a sort of like credibility establisher. Like, hey guys, I'm not just some like random lunatic smearing people with progressive politics on Twitter. I'm a consultant. I gotta say, one product of like, going to like certain like private colleges and going to and living in a place in like New York is that there's a lot of consultants out there, is all how I'll put it. It is not like this automatic credibility confer.
One day I'll figure out what they're doing when I talk to them at parties.
Right, precisely. It's like, you're a consultant. Terrific.
My first semester as a communication studies student, a professor's like, you want to get into consulting.
You want to get into
very little work for a lot of money.
Like, I manage Sabra's Facebook page.
That is
I'm a consultant.
absolutely the path of least resistance when you're graduating from an elite college.
So
they come to campus and recruit you.
So somebody just basically, I don't even know how they did it, but so I'm sure Sam will talk about it, but actually doxing somebody is really horrible and unacceptable, and I would never advocate for anybody. That's called putting like somebody's address.
Yeah.
Like
only for fascists.
So somebody actually basically saying like, oh, there's a LinkedIn account that goes with this disgusting Twitter propaganda account.
Yeah.
And this is upsetting people?
It's disingenuous.
Yeah, I know.
These are dishonest actors, I will say.
Disingenuity.
My editorial is these people are dishonest actors. Also, Tom Watson apparently was on it, and Tom Watson. Well, I thought he was a British politician, but apparently there's a lesser-known guy named Tom Watson.
Tom Watson,
who's
Tom Watson the lesser.
He's a Hillary poster. He's a Hillary poster who blocked me before I even knew.
Why
who
does
he
that
was.
even exist in 2019?
A Hillary poster?
Like, what other person had
He's
has
definitely
such a
on-
fixated relationship with such a mediocre politician? It's so bizarre. What's your speculation?
I think he's on like
Your
some
speculation.
some DCCC payroll.
That's what
to
you
post
think.
about like centrist Dems and the Mets, basically.
They're so bad at it.
Oh my god, I hate when the people insist on like
having a personality.
Oh, see, I'm a normal guy. I'm really into the Mets. Shut up, you're not normal.
I love being just a complete corporate shill, but also having my child, and not that either any of these people have this, but the people that have their kids in their profile pictures as they just do the most horrible, most greed-driven things online.
Just
it's also funny when they try to meme.
But yeah, retweet that. Everyone should know about who Horace eBooks or whatever his name is.
Yeah, I didn't really know who he was.
Keep Horace eBooks out of this, Matt.
I just knew that he was just some
trash.
That it was just some trash account, and it's like what I don't. I mean, I guess I don't know. I guess he didn't want to have his name, but it's like we all knew from
the
reading
tweet
the
that
account that he
didn't
was
have
some
the name.
corporate
The name was
consultant.
The name was specifically blocked out.
The name was specifically blocked. I still don't know his name.
Yeah,
I
neither
just
do
know
I.
that he's a Exxon, I think.
Yeah, I know the relevant
and
information.
that he looks like
about
he
where
likes auditions for the roles of dentists and
quite
Manhattan-based comedies.
It's a shame the liberals don't respect our founding fathers anymore, because the founding fathers had a very, very not very deep they abided to the idea that you would be not
horse whisperer, eh?
I'm not comfortable defending the founding fathers. Disinterestedness is the word I was looking for.
You're calling from a 502 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Michael, this is Aaron from Texas.
Hey, Aaron, what's going on? What's on your mind?
Well, there was two potential things I wanted to talk about, depending on how comfortable you were discussing Bernie going on Rogan.
I don't want to. I mean, I'm good. I'm glad he did it. It's a good thing. Do you have anything else?
Yeah, we can talk about something else.
Okay. Cool.
So my dad actually was a Trump supporter. He voted for Trump in 2016.
Right.
And he's always identified with the Republicans. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I said I hear you. Yep, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, okay. But so throughout his first term, I've managed to convince him to support Bernie Sanders a couple times.
Great.
But it seems like he always kind of reverts back to these right-wing tendencies, and he buys into framing of like Fox News and the Republicans, and he's kind of back in their in their thrall or whatever. But and I guess I was just curious: is there like a futility in trying to convince certain people?
Well, I mean, it's your pops. So I'm assuming you're going to be talking with your dad, so you might as well talk to your dad. I mean,
I would ask...
Unless you find it to, unless you get disheartened, why not?
Who else does he talk about politics with?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. I don't think he actually talks about it with anyone but me and maybe people at his work. So.
That's always the thing, because like workplaces have a bit large like right-wing email culture and things like that really
especially the majority report.
Yeah.
So I'm like, hey, Brendan, can you stop? Every time Sam says something, Brendan's always just like, psh, nonsense. Michael, let me hit you with this QAnon stuff later.
but that's where
Matt and Brendan and I have a secret right-wing cell.
That's where a lot of this stuff comes
Jamie
from.
posts a lot of Obama era stuff.
Jamie,
Right.
I had no idea. For someone who's constantly talking about being, no borders or whatever, Jamie's extremely concerned about where Obama was born, is all I'll say.
Yeah.
It's weird.
I mean, like email groups and email forwards are sort of the advance for the fascist takeover, really, because like Fox News couldn't be talking about bordering on birther stuff
that's
if the groundwork
vanguard.
wasn't
That's
set
right.
before, and it is all through that, because that's really powerful. If all your coworkers are sharing this stuff, like Obama wasn't born here, or like Democrats would lose California if we had voter ID, like
right.
That's I mean, what more do you need? That's where you're getting your money, and now that's where you're getting your ideas from.
We don't know that that's what's going on at his
Right.
work.
We don't know that, but I would say that's where I would start to look if he keeps reverting back
I mean,
to that.
I think this is evidence of how effective and evil the Fox media empire really is. Like, I have a friend who had a similar experience with her dad in rural Rhode Island, who, is not a rich person. His material class interests align much more with Bernie Sanders, but he showed some signs of going that way, but then he watches Fox News 24/7, and it completely blots out any chances of progress that he might have had.
I don't know how receptive your dad is, but the stories that I've heard like this, where there's been a little bit of an ease up, it starts with like the conversations you're having, and then it seems to, are they willing to do something like listen to the majority report, right? Because I think partially you just need to have what Fox does is Fox organizes the information of your worldview. So, and all media does this, right? And so that's the question of this like pure objective thing is a fantasy. It's just a question of which ones are doing it to better effect for more people and how honest they're being while they do it. But I think part of the reason that you can't persuade somebody with like an argument here and there is that first and foremost, it's social. I agree with that, Matt. And I think secondly, you're having your whole like intellectual infrastructure organized in a certain way. And, just even like as an example, like because some of it is just like what topics you choose to cover, right? Like that you saw this a lot with like, the part of the reason like some of the, right-wing people on the internet, they could always find like examples of like some left-wing people supposedly being left-wing and, being ridiculous. And it's like, okay, sure. Or like you could spend that all day doing that. And then it's like, if you spend all day actually listening to, economists and labor organizers talking about wage stagnation, that will give you a different baseline for how to process information. So I would say that maybe if your dad is open, you might suggest some other, what you think he might like in terms of it. Probably actually watching the Joe Rogan interview might not be a bad idea for your dad for what it's worth. But something that's like a broader induction into a worldview versus just like, some sort of points here and there. That's what I think is probably the most effective thing, at least from what I've heard.
Yeah, there are so few platforms anymore that are not completely polarized in terms of their viewership and that are seen as actual neutral platforms, whether that's really true or not. And I think that is one value that Joe Rogan has. Like, Bernie reached a lot of people who he wouldn't have otherwise via going on the Joe Rogan show, and that's valuable.
Of course, absolutely. Thanks for the call, man.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
No, appreciate it. Thanks.
Let's see. All right, let's do some more sounds. So, which one do you want to do? This one? So there's an uprising in Hong Kong right now. There is a broad set of concerns at stake. And in the politics in Hong Kong, as far as the sort of capital class goes, there's people on both sides of this division. There's a very large part of the business sector there that has no problem with further and further integration with Beijing. The story goes back to at least the modern iteration in 1997 when Britain returned Hong Kong to China. The agreement was one country, two systems. And that was that Hong Kong really had established a level of basically liberal protections for its citizens. Beijing has never fulfilled that promise entirely at all. And in the last couple of years, things like this extradition law, which was put on the table, which would have allowed citizens of Hong Kong to be extradited to mainland China, have helped grow a serious protest movement. As I say, I think there's people on the business side that are comfortable, that are on both sides of this conflict. If you have a left perspective, and one of the reasons I get very annoyed with some of the kind of silly blind China apologism is that labor is definitely extremely concerned about this in a variety of ways. I mean, one area is that even just Hong Kong, because of its relative openness, is a place where labor unions can base for monitoring labor conditions inside China. I mean, if you're concerned about the brutal conditions that Apple, as an example, uses in China, you're almost certainly getting some of that information filtered out of people that are based in Hong Kong. So if you are concerned about those issues have a serious stake for you with regards to what's happening in Hong Kong. And look, it's a broad liberal rights movement, and that's a valid thing, frankly. And I think also there's no doubt that Xi Jinping, who has consolidated more power for himself than any Chinese premier since Mao, and in a context where international norms are shifting, that India can just go into Kashmir, make that move, the stakes are really escalating. This video is fascinating. One, it should give a lot of people pause about our critique of the liberation struggle and the left movements in South Africa. I've done a lot of coverage of South Africa, and there's no doubt that there's internal problems in the ANC. There's also no doubt that the economic freedom fighters have areas where there should be very serious critiques. But this woman from South Africa who emigrated to Hong Kong is a great example of the type of class politics that those that wanted to rebuild South Africa into a proper democracy were up against.
Yeah, this is bigger than her. She represents something that
right, and that's why please pray to God no one finds her name and bothers her personally or anything like that. Yeah. This is an avatar for an attitude. It's like that's the only reason that this is relevant.
It's like you crystallized in amber, sort of like what the Settler Project would become.
Precisely. Yes.
From South Africa to move away from this. Like South Africa has this.
Come on, mate.
I don't want
this. Come on, mate.
This is not the Hong Kong that I've learned to love. Like everybody is so everybody in Hong Kong is so lovable and welcoming for all foreigners, and then to experience this, it hurts me. It really hurts me.
How do you feel about the police actions to the protesters?
There's a good and a bad to both protesters, and there's a good and a bad to police. And I just wish both sides would just stop. Like, I understand what they're fighting for, and I appreciate what everybody's fighting for.
It's easy to say.
Wow, those lovable Orientals.
She's got
right?
no skin in the game, except for I just want to be in a global financial hub with very limited rights and mass inequality that could be invaded and formally reoccupied.
She understands that, Michael, but
I get it.
But the people were lovable. Okay?
The people are lovable.
They were welcoming, humble, inscrutable.
Oh, they had a certain wisdom to them. We
got some more.
A certain pre-verbal sense of knowing. All right, let's go. Yeah.
I wish both sides would just stop. Like, I understand what they're fighting for, and I appreciate what everybody's fighting for, but this is not what we're supposed to be like. We're supposed to be fighting together, not against each other. This is not the Hong Kong that I want to be in. Really, I don't. I would rather go back to South Africa if this is what I'm going to be living with for the next few years. It's unacceptable.
Wait, if they're all fighting...
Please don't return. We already have enough difficulties. Can you maybe look at Singapore? This is another area in Asia that is highly repressive, but does not have political instability now.
Yeah, you want to keep going.
Can you maybe go to Singapore?
Wait.
Could you please consider that?
If we're all fighting together, who are we fighting against?
Yeah, the protesters and Xi Jinping need to
Xi
fight on the
Jinping
same side.
and the woman who had her eye shot out by a beanbag just need to sit down, iron out, and say, like, look, this South African lady is feeling very uncomfortable.
Yeah,
That's a great clip.
We all need to fight to make her chill. Can you look? Maybe. I have heard that Kuala Lumpur is having a boom. Please consider. There is always Dubai. The servants will not even look at you in the face. You can buy a passport, I assume, in your economic bracket. Let's do a couple more footage from Hong Kong. This was footage. This is we don't have number 7. Do you have number 8? Let's do number 8. Do we have number 8? All right. I mean, we can pivot from Hong Kong if
we don't have number 8. It's on the list. Guys, if it's on the list, I need to be able to go to it. All right, let's take a call.
Well,
all right, let's take a call.
People have requested I do a show with Sam, so I'll just do a little bit of dose.
Please.
You're calling from an 805. You're calling from an 805 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Shane calling from Ventura, California. Am I on?
Hi, Shane. What questions do you have?
Well, Jamie said something really clever a couple of weeks ago. She said a lot of clever
You
things
should call the
that I wanted to
Antifada.
address.
What else do you have?
And, I wanted to address it on this show. She was talking about the different things that our society used to be bound by, whether it was patriarchy, religion, different manifestations of tradition. That's something that it feels like the left has not had the strongest emphasis on, at least in my short couple of years of coming into the left, of drawing those clear lines from classic, traditional class struggle historically in American history and emphasizing those things, and instead has kind of not emphasized even pre-American, like the levelers or all of these long-standing traditional liberational movements historically that you can kind of draw a pretty straight line to from them to us. And I feel like it's those aesthetics, because we do live in an age of spectacle, that the left should call to in order to, one, appeal to the traditionally minded, because there's always people who are going to prefer the older thing over the newer thing. And two, to go after specific demographics that the right has kind of taken over and colonized. For example, veterans or the religious, who could easily be liberated with addressing, one, their material concerns, and two, creating and developing a narrative that welcomes them in. I don't see a lot of that right now. I see that beginning, but I love your reaction to that.
Okay.
I know that was a lot, but I love
worries.
your reaction.
Thanks for the call.
Thank you for the question. I think there might be a bit of linguistic slippage going on here. We have to be careful. On the one hand, when we're talking about the rich tradition of activism and resistance on the left, certainly we should tap into that going forward. But the kinds of institutions that I was talking about, the kinds of traditional institutions like patriarchy, the church, and the bourgeois family, I was not saying that those things were good. I was saying that those things were incredibly oppressive, both to people inside of them, especially women, and people on whose backs they always existed, like the poor, queer people, people of color, people in the global south. So on the one hand, I think this current era of neoliberal capitalism has broken down a lot of these things, and that's a good thing. But we need to replace them with something because everyone's super alienated and super messed up. And I realize that I'm oversimplifying things when I say that because I only have so much time on this show. But I've been saying that we need to form new kinds of community and new kinds of social bonds that go beyond those old ways of organizing certain sectors of society. Because their breakdown has created an opening in which we can hopefully create something that's better, that's truly inclusive, that's truly reflects the working class in all of its diversity. And it's not going to be easy. It's like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? We lack a material basis for that. But like, we have to try, because I think that's going to be a really important ingredient in the fight ahead. And like I was talking with some queer radical organizers the other day, it makes sense to have these efforts be led by queer people of color, specifically people who have been historically excluded from these kinds of formations and have had to form their own communities outside of it.
I would read Scott Atran.
Well, I've been saying for a long time that if you want something to do, if you're looking for reading material, find something about your local history.
Definitely.
Because especially if you want to relate to other people in your community, because being able to do that is frankly a very simple thing to draw on that is actually impressive and tells people that you're speaking to what they do. But I mean, literary hangover. I make jokes about becoming the anti-Jordan Peterson, but I do think if we have to fight myth with history. Myth with history. That is the book. And I think if you go through history enough, and I think the color kind of suggests this, but if you go through history enough, some of this stuff starts to look sort of familiar, and you see the same sort of patterns emerging. And I'm not like a cyclical, like fourth turning Bannon type of guy. I think this is just a sort of structure of human how human society works and how exploitation works, and you're going to see the same patterns over and over again, and making those familiar to people. I think are really important. And I think, frankly, the more democratic a media environment is, the more that will happen naturally.
Read also Harvey J.K. for the American Project specifically. That's really important. I would definitely check out his work.
Can I give two practical examples of this too? Because I feel like I'm accused of being vague when I talk about this.
One.
Well, one is unions, right? An incredibly diverse working class institution that needs to be brought back. Two, it's only in its infancy, but we're working on a project in North Brooklyn DSA, actually, called Neighborhood Councils. And my hope is that if it goes well, we can expand it to other parts of DSA where we put together hyper-local groups of organizers. We're all in a little group DM now. We can talk to each other and show up to our community board meetings, our community gardens, and kind of have a buddy system so people aren't afraid to go. And hopefully through that, talk to our neighbors, people that maybe we weren't talking to before, and get some idea of the power centers in the community, the work that's already being done, people we can help out in coalition, and yada, yada. Hopefully. I hate that I ended that on yada, yada, because it's very important to me.
It's not yada, yada. It's post yada, yada. All right, let's do number 7, please. That's really important. Okay. These are protesters in Hong Kong who have eye patches on in solidarity with a protester who was injured a couple of days ago. Wow. So young. Jesus. All right, and in Shenzhen, which is where this is where a Chinese invasion would come. We don't exactly know what is inside these vehicles, but this video was released a couple days ago. Basically showing some sort of paramilitary readiness in Shenzhen. And this, to me, I mean, if they did, this is analogous. I mean, people make obviously the Tiananmen Square crackdown analogies, but this would also be very similar to when during the Arab uprisings, the Saudis deployed brigades into Bahrain to crush an uprising there as well. I think I did a little bit of an elaboration on this on TMBS, and I'll just say really quickly, it's very, very important to look. It would be absolutely naive and delusional to think that there isn't U.S. interests and U.S. influence in every corner of the planet. That's what the U.S. is right now. And there is a radically different thing between some areas where there really are just essentially kind of local oligarch U.S.-backed coups. Then there are situations where there's a lot of organic conditions on the ground where maybe, I mean, look, it might be advantageous from a certain strategic U.S. viewpoint to embarrass China, to see them get caught up in a situation like this. That's all valid. But if you think that this is purely orchestrated from the outside and this doesn't arise from real conditions inside Hong Kong in terms of people wanting to protect and enhance their civil rights in that sense, or with broader concerns about what the nature of governance is there, as well as the shifting nature of what Chinese governance itself is looking like, you're just being incredibly naive and narcissistic in terms of how you do politics. And again, there's a longer TMBS clip where I elaborate that. But I want to note that because I always see that feedback every time I talk about this.
A lot of dumb people in the chat.
Yeah, don't be a dumb anti-imperialist. You pretzel yourself into some really bad positions that way.
Well, it's just not. I mean, just look at the world. I mean, I don't. It's and again, I look at it in such a practical way. If Chinese and Russian influence keeps the United States from invading in Venezuela or helps subvert the blockade, that's great. So and that's the way you have to understand something like this. I mean, you're talking about China's prime sphere of influence. Now, the United States is influence everywhere because it's the biggest power in the world. There's no doubt about that. But you're reducing yourself. It's not even an anti-imperialist worldview. You just have a U.S. worldview, period. And
yeah, well, the only imperialism they care about is American imperialism.
And there's just more happening in the world than the United States, particularly in that part of the world. All right. But speaking to a part of the world where the United States has a great deal of power, and you can track the crisis. If you look at the foreign policy towards both the Middle East and Latin America, which have generated serious migration, those are inseparable from bombings and coup mongering. You cannot have these conversations without having foreign policy conversations. The epicenter of what has happened from Latin America is a coup. This is the wrong clip. We'll get to that in a second. We want the clip number 10.
Now I want to do the Sam voice.
This is the wrong clip. No, guys, this is why we need to run it through.
In 2009, I say this all the time, but it's crucial. The coup that removed Manuel Zelaya from office in Honduras is the nexus and the basis upon which there's a broader reversal of the pink tide, which are progressive governments across Latin America, which brought cumulatively 70 million people out of poverty, 40 million in Brazil alone. Manuel Zelaya was following that trajectory in Central America. And what you saw coming out of that coup is military junta, right-wing narco governments. There's mass protests happening in Honduras against the current state, all of which have been backed by the United States in drug war partnerships, in terms of trade, in terms of sweatshops, and so on.
Queen Hillary legitimized it around the world.
I don't think she legitimized it, but she certainly backed it. It wasn't legitimized in Latin America. It wasn't legitimized in Latin America ever. But the Obama and Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State absolutely backed this coup. And so you can't understand anything we're talking about at the border without that coup being in the primary context. And this clip from Democracy Now! With Sonia Nazaro, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, with Amy Goodman really helps broaden that context.
I think, Amy, the level of rot that starts at the top and goes to the bottom, it affects people having medicines that are basically don't work because people get kickbacks to buy back bad medicines. It affects the lack of teachers in schools. 1 in 4 teachers don't exist. They're ghost teachers because of corruption. It affects people's daily lives. And I think what I'd want to say is that we need to have more compassion towards these people who are running from these very violent circumstances. And I believe that we should not cut off U.S. aid to Central America. I know that this is a controversial point of view, but I think some of this aid I have seen, especially humanitarian aid, not military, not police aid, humanitarian aid has been used by the U.S. to lower violence, to lower impunity, to lower corruption. This is a 10 to 20-year effort. But it is more humane. It is more effective. It is better to find a way to allow people to stay in these countries and improve conditions there. And it's way cheaper than to lock up all these people in these horrible prisons in the United States, which is costing us billions and billions of dollars.
So I have no problem with the idea of humanitarian aid in the region. I mean, the concern that comes with humanitarian aid, particularly in Latin America, is that can easily be correlated with the political forces that the United States wants to support and propagate in these regions, and that's a global pattern, and that's a tool of U.S. foreign policy. There's never any pure altruism. That's totally naive. However, on balance, some of these programs could be beneficial and correct, but the broader structure here, if you want to get away from this type of crisis you see, is you need to fundamentally pull back from the drug war and from treating Central and Latin America is a giant natural resources and sweatshop factory for U.S. corporate and commercial interests. That's always been our policy there. That is truly a bipartisan thing. Another thing, that we shouldn't be distracted from is looking at Joe Biden's record in Latin America specifically. It's atrocious. It's appalling. And it's completely inseparable from his criminal justice and imprisonment record. But if you want to actually deal with migration, you actually have to deal with the types of foreign policies you see from Yemen to Honduras. And that needs to be at the fundamental structure of this conversation. And then, of course, that bleeds to the rising authoritarianism of the United States. This footage happened, this happened in just yesterday, I believe. These are protesters in New Jersey protesting an ICE facility there.
Wait, I thought it was in Rhode Island.
And well, I see it. They both say New Jersey. So where is it?
I guess Jamie.
All right.
I mean, I just talked to someone who was
there. All right,
there.
this is okay. So this is a ICE detention center. We're going to double check whether it's in Rhode Island or New Jersey. People are protesting, holding a vigil outside of this center, and someone, an ICE detention guard, drives through the crowd. So, of course, a couple of years ago, Heather Heyer was murdered by a white supremacist in Charlottesville. The echoes and the parallels are quite obvious.
You also remember during the Dakota Access Pipeline case, North Dakota Republicans wanted to pass a law that said that cleared drivers of liability in the case they hit protesters in the roadway.
Yes, that was a major legislative push, yeah. So we have more of it?
This is subsequently when they come in with pepper spray to clear the crowd out.
Okay, they come in with pepper spray after this guy is driven through to clear it up with pepper spray. And if we confirmed where we're talking about, this is in Rhode Island. Okay, go ahead.
The whole world is watching! The whole world is watching!
Oh, and it wasn't the cops who pepper sprayed those protesters either. It was guards from the ICE facility.
Right. So you should watch your history on the coup and the subsequent right-wing regimes that the United States has backed in Honduras directly correlates with people putting their bodies on the line to stop the kidnapping of children and the detainment of human beings. Beto O'Rourke was never going to happen. I believe I said that right out of the gate. I never bought it. And he has been through several different iterations now. I am actually shocked. I really did think last week he would drop out and decide to run for Senate. But the man's delusions know no bounds. And now we've got Beto 3.0. Let's check it out.
And I got to tell you, there's some part of me.
Pause it.
And is it?
Beto 3.0 still is a wobbly motherfucker. Look at this. I got to tell you that my hands make gestures that don't make any sense.
I mean, he hits the microphone here. It's not a good
whacking.
start.
He's wacky. All right, let's go.
I need to see how sad he is in this clip.
He doesn't look sad.
And I got to tell you, there's some part of me, and there's a big part of me, that wants to stay here and be with my family and be with my community. I love El Paso. There have even been some who've suggested that I stay in Texas and run for Senate. But that would not be good enough for this community. That would not be good enough for El Paso. That would not be good enough for this country. We must take the fight directly to the source of this problem. That person who has caused this pain and placed this country in this moment of peril. And that is Donald Trump.
Everybody's like, really?
Oh,
man.
That's
What are you
pathological.
talking about?
I feel like he's still sad on the inside, though.
Oh, he's delusional. He's out of his mind.
I don't think so.
Like I said, Beto, call me. I'll set you
Look
straight.
at that. That is so incredible. And do you notice the way the clap started is like, I guess we're going to support. That's like someone just told you that they were going to like sink their life savings into a beachfront property that needs repair.
Look at his face. He doesn't even look like he believes it.
No.
What are you doing? Baby boy? Come on.
I'm unclear. Is there another Democrat besides Keisha Rogers that's running against Cornyn?
Sema Hernandez, right?
Oh, is there? Okay, good.
Sema Hernandez is running.
Because I just looked it up, and she's a LaRouche PAC person, so I didn't know if.
So you're supporting her?
Yeah. So I've taken out a new credit card so I can donate to the campaign.
I really thought Beto was going to get out of here. Well, how silly! All right, you're calling from a 917 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Oh, hey, Michael and the group. This is Waterbill from Kashmir.
Hey, how are you? Good to hear from you.
Thank you. It was an excellent review today. Thank you. And now you introduced me to a new source where I can actually look up information from, the neutral or the Indian side at least. Just wanted to give a quick, update from what I've seen. So still in lockdown in Kashmir. There's information blackout. But as of yesterday, they've arrested they've started to arrest journalists. They arrested a journalist, and the fact-finding mission that the guest mentioned, they came back and they did an interview, and at least in Huffington Post, the Indian edition, there's an article there. Then I'll just read the headline: "Arresting Children in Kashmir," and everyone should really check out this article. The sickening thing is, I fully expected this, but like a year down the line, when the protests would just go out of whack and they would try to terrorize families. But they have been doing this for the past week.
Yeah.
If this fact-finding mission is to be believed. And so they went full brown shirt. And I sent a message in yesterday because I was thinking this is bigger than Kashmir, because India's problem is the fascism road that they've taken. And that has to be it, because no previous government did that, and there's just so much more that you can go into. So, you guys were talking about crown fascists. And you mentioned like Modi's not one of them, but there are a lot of clown fascists in India, but they're just not. They're not given. They're not put into power positions.
Right.
They've had a century of ground game. RSS.
The RSS goes back to the 40s, right? I mean, maybe even earlier.
Oh no.
Earlier.
No. It goes back into at least the 30s from the quotes I've seen. But Nehru was complaining about RSS in the 30s.
These are the same people that assassinated, I mean, at least adjacent to assassinated Gandhi. I mean, yes.
Oh, you mean like his son? Oh, no, sorry. No,
Mahatma.
I was thinking Rajiv Gandhi, but Mahatma Gandhi. Yeah, of course.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, after this past election, and I might have mentioned this before, one of the BJP MPs who was elected said that the guy who assassinated Gandhi is misunderstood and is actually a hero.
Right.
But beyond that,
he was misunderstood. He was actually a hero. Sorry. I apologize. That was the clown fascism.
No, I couldn't help it. Like I've been tweeting out like Trump impressions because it just makes you, I don't know, makes you. It's easier to digest, and I actually appreciate this. I don't know. If I do, which is why I listen to your show anyway, because you guys make hard things easier to digest. Because otherwise, you just want to cry, But no, the big thing is I was in like social media wilderness, and I jumped on like last week because I was like, okay, you know what, I have to go in. I had promised never to get on Twitter or any of these things, and I gotta say, people are nuts. Usually I just thought the people you guys talk about are nuts. No, like people are insane in the world, and ignorance is a bliss. But the thing in India, from what I've seen, like from reading articles, is it's a whole other world, and I think we're not far off there if MAGA keeps up for another 10, 15 years, hopefully not, is where anyone who speaks out against the government, anyone who talks about, human rights, as, your guest mentioned, is labeled like a Pakistani agent or an ISI agent, which is like a big thing in India. It's a way to shut down the conversation.
Right.
And they're attacking like public intellectuals, academics, who have, who've been doing this for decades,
I interviewed Soumya Shankar about this a couple of months ago, and she said this from the perspective of somebody who is on the left and strongly critical of Congress on economic policies, but said, look, I mean, there was, for all of the flaws, I keep trying to emphasize this, there was something that held from the Nehru generation, even in some small way, which clearly Modi and BJP are trying to destroy root and branch. And a big part of that is opposition media, is academics. I mean, the other parallel here you could look at is Erdogan. Erdogan certainly always won real big elections. He had genuine, serious ground support. And he wanted to and has done a horrible and effective job of really streamlining and destroying open society in Turkey. I mean, that's another great, parallel there. Anyways, man, I appreciate the call. I'm sorry that this is happening.
Thank you very much,
I hope we'll keep covering it. I'll keep covering it everywhere I can.
Oh, and P.S. I thought of the other clown-looking ass fascist that I was thinking of.
Thank you so much,
Geert Wilders.
Oh, Geert, right. And he's actually like the first one, and he's
Steve King, buddy.
OG clown
He's
fash.
an OG clown fash, definitely. MR fan, excellent interview, Mike. I kind of think the swamp Vlad talked about draining was us, the left. Still think that the Republican Party will start a fight. Bernie, the true president in 2020. I didn't follow all of that. K. Let's see. Let's see. So Rogan said on his podcast that Kyle Kalinske was the one responsible for getting Bernie on the show. That's great. That's awesome.
Kyle's a plug.
Kyle's mad props to Kyle. Yes. I think that is true. Let's see. Pajama Boy. Saw an ad today for Gillibrand, and they're offering a free t-shirt for a $1 donation. Quite desperate. Oh my God. I can't believe, I really thought I was off the grid for several days. I really thought she would. I realized, well, I didn't even think of her. But now that you mention her, I thought she would have dropped out in that time period.
It's time.
You couldn't pay me $1 to wear a Gillibrand t-shirt.
No. Well, yeah. What would now I have to throw away a t-shirt?
Yeah, that's very ecologically harmful, Gillibrand.
I only wear my Bernie 2016 one like 4 times a year.
You're calling from a 405 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, I'm Gregory from Oklahoma.
Hey! It's our buddy Gregory from Oklahoma. How are you, Greg? What's going on?
I'm doing good. Things have been really well for me the last couple of months.
Terrific. Well deserved.
I'm getting ready to start college next week.
Congrats.
And I have some pretty big things planned for my show.
Excellent.
And
you still going to college in Oklahoma, Gregory?
Am I what?
You going to college in Oklahoma?
Yes, UCO in Edmond.
No.
University of Central Oklahoma. Yeah.
Great.
Yep.
What's going on with the show?
The Green Corn Rebellion show.
The Green Corn Rebellion show. Check it out.
Some things that I can't announce right now.
Ooh,
but they're in the works.
Snap.
So, yeah.
Wow. Show business. Show business, Greg. I love it.
Yeah, so
very awesome.
Everyone should stay tuned and find out what's going on with the show.
Agree.
I'm gonna go ahead and get off now. So
Greg, well, look at Greg. Look at Greg. Greg just totally
stuck the landing.
Look at him becoming.
Been listening to some Michael Brooks
I was
show,
gonna ask
TMBS
him,
on Patreon, TMBS on YouTube.
I was going to ask him what tunes he's jamming on
man.
lately.
Greg, are you still there?
No.
Nope. He landed that.
Limp Bizkit, I think. Is what he would say.
He's a great defender of new metal.
Yeah, he's a big fan of the Chocolate Starfish and the Hot Dog Flavored Water album.
They could learn 1, 2, 3, or 4 things from how Greg does calls. You're calling from a 714 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? Or excuse me, 713. My apologies. 713. Are you there?
Hey, 713?
Yeah, 713. You there? What's on your mind?
Yeah, this is David from Houston.
Hey,
Not
David.
to be mistaken with David from Massachusetts who wants to deplatform Sam.
Okay. What's on your mind?
Okay, yeah, I was trying to call to have you dunk on one of the progressive media, Kyle Kalinske.
I'm not going to do that, buddy. Well, you
We
got
just
anything
gave it
else?
props.
Yeah, you got anything else?
Kyle's doing work, man.
Kyle's doing good work. Anything else besides trying to stir up Are you calling on behalf of Progressive Voice? Here, I'll stir up a little bit of drama. Are you a
No,
cutout
no.
operative
It's just
for
that-
Progressive
that-
Voice?
It's just that I saw that he had a horrible video
You're
on
still
Trump's
trying.
impeachment.
I'm not doing it. What else you got? Oh, sorry, I hung up on him. I'm sorry, not sorry. Not doing it. Not in the drama creation.
We're not
guys.
about.
Sorry.
Here's the thing about Majority Report and
Right.
how our ideas get eventually adopted by all of the social media or the YouTube sphere is we don't force it. I mean, well, I guess with a certain specific example where we might.
Sometimes we might want to force it.
Sometimes we might want to force it over and over. But actually, even to what Jimmy Dore is, that was our callers that would constantly say, like, did you see Jimmy Dore said this? And then we'd get off on 30 minutes.
Yeah,
on Jimmy
we
Dore.
are fine with having drama with certain people, though. Let's be real here. It's just you got to pick your battles, you know? Like, there are some people who are on the left who I think are kind of not that great, but they're not my enemies, so I just would never talk about them.
Leave it to the experts.
I would say
I'm
we're
burned out on
not.
it.
We're not in. I'm
Also,
or at least-
I legit I'm sure I've I don't know. Like I've debated Kyle on
Yeah.
some things, but Kyle's great. Like I'm not. Don't be looking to stir up nonsense in like the smallest sub pockets.
It's not even stirring up nonsense.
Yeah.
It's enforcing orthodoxies.
Right, and that's a problem. That I reject entirely, and that's also how you get into subculturalism versus mass building. You're calling from a 570 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
This is me. Is this me?
Yeah, this is you. What's
Hello?
on your mind? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Ken. I'm calling from PA.
Hey, Ken.
Just wanted to take a second to talk about the situation in Hong Kong where they were waving the American flag.
Okay.
But it was actually kind of funny that right now that they would even be reaching out to America for some type of even lip service. And the fact that we're right now under their thumb with somebody like Donald Trump, who would then not even take the time to use this as an opportunity to attack China, because you'd think that that would be something he'd be interested in. He then just defaults back to, oh, protesters, man. Can't have these protesters. These guys are obviously against the law. We need to do whatever we can to crack down on these people in Hong Kong that are just fighting for their basic freedoms.
Yeah, I wouldn't hold it against, whatever, people on the ground. But I mean, China, there's actually a very clear pattern that basically the only country that Trump has had any clear consistency in talking about human rights on is Iran. Everywhere else in the world, he basically does not speak. I guess occasionally Venezuela. But I mean, it's pretty obvious why that's not his bag. Thanks for the call, Ken. Appreciate it.
I forget the source of this information, but wasn't there, and I hope it's not John Oliver, but wasn't there a story about how what Chinese officials, I think it was about the Silk Road Initiative, how the Chinese officials are most concerned about CIA propaganda, specifically about unionizing the workplace?
Absolutely.
Which is like, if the left were to take complete power, we should probably just abolish the CIA. But if you were to keep it around, that would probably be a good use for it.
Right. But I mean, yeah, but I love that because that just shows the pure opportunism of how a lot of these things work.
Yeah,
and functionality
on both sides. Yeah,
in both sides. You're calling from an 818 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Michael. Dave from Jamaica.
Dave from Jamaica. I'm used to hearing you on the main show.
Huh.
How are you doing, man?
You're getting so. Go ahead.
How are you doing, Dave? What's on your mind, buddy?
Not too much. Actually, I would say it's kind of a Jamie question, but it's for everybody. I generally
Yes, sorry.
I agree with the idea of open borders as a future project for sure. Hopefully, the next 20 years or so, because I think it's necessary for this whole human civilization thing to keep running. But I guess I was going to ask Jamie and you guys, how do you get to that point where the general population will be, to kind of tamp down their tribal instincts? Because I see it here in Jamaica as well and other countries where people's identity and the border thing are kind of related in a way, because, well, I'll just let you guys go off on that.
Sure. I could take a stab at this. I mean, first of all, I think when you say instincts, we need to be careful anytime you're making an assumption about human nature, right? Like, I'm reading Sex at Dawn right now by Christopher Ryan, and he kind of creates an anthropological framework for the idea that people in the state of nature or whatever, hunter-gatherer society, which is most of our history as a species, right? Because agriculture was a fairly recent innovation. We were not living in the Hobbesian way that Hobbes described, right? Solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. We lived in a much more communal way, with much less conflict and a lot more sex, by the way. And
or that, yeah.
And it's only recently that humans became more competitive, tribalistic, hierarchical, yada yada. I keep saying that word, but I know what you mean, right? Like, people believe in these things now. We've grown up in a society where we're incredibly inculcated with it, and it seems counterintuitive to a lot of people. Like, well, if we open the borders, the country will cease to exist. What's going on with that? Like, yes, actually, global socialism eventually down the line will necessitate the abolishing of borders at the same time that we abolish, the rule of the market, right? Because if you open the borders and capital is still moving people around, that's not really free movement of people, because they also need to have the right to stay where they are if they want to. So how do we move towards that in policy and rhetoric? I mean, there are many things that people can agree on right now, steps we can take towards that goal to have more open borders, right? We can demilitarize the border. We can abolish ICE and not replace it with anything. We can close the camps. We can decriminalize migration. And all of these are steps on the way to a much more radical horizon where that's concerned. But also we can keep our eyes on the prize. And hopefully, in the course of struggle And in the course of working with lots of activists who really believe in this stuff and are coming from a very radical framework, hopefully more and more people will get wise to it and see how it benefits not just immigrants, not just basic humanity towards each other, which is definitely important, but, you know, the working class as a whole, which includes most of us.
So I just want to say, Dave, I'll just give you a little bit of I have a different spin on it. You know, I'll just cover that quickly. I think there's a lot of different interesting perspectives on this. I mean, one, I just think precisely because it is a horizon after horizon after horizon sort of goal, that it's actually really important right now to disaggregate what we're actually talking about. So I think that there's no doubt that right now, today, 2019, a vast, infinite majority of the world's people do not want their countries to dissolve, right? And whether or not we think of that as a long-term goal, because we want to be post-country, or whether we want some type of sort of like global EU arrangements, which is more of like a kind of practical, realizable thing, maybe in decades, that's one thing.
Global socialist revolution.
Sure. But in the short term, I think it's very important to basically say, again, there's already actually international standards that if they were upheld on refugees, as an example, that would already actually cover the vast majority of humanitarian and rights cases that people are actually talking about and focusing on. So that's actually number one, which is that in order to be in compliance with and focus on meeting actual immediate needs right now, there doesn't need to be any highfalutin rhetoric about this or that. There needs to be an actual focus on implementing what is already international law and what is already actually domestic law. That's incredibly important. The second tension that I think we actually need to be much more, thoughtful about is that a lot, there's two lanes of the rhetoric of open borders, which is interesting to me. So one comes from the position of people who are like in some of the most repressed, dangerous positions on earth, needing to cross borders to survive. And I think in many people's cases, again, just as like an objective reality, if you didn't have to travel thousands of miles to survive, you probably wouldn't do it. So you're already talking about arising out of environments that have been destabilized by coups and civil war and climate and so on. So those are the structural factors that could actually ameliorate those things, even as in the crisis conditions now, there's no doubt that people should be given refuge, period. And then there's this others, like much more sort of like, is a very long-term utopian thinking, some of which I actually am very sympathetic to, but I know it has nothing to do with like a certain present political conditions. And I think that this is something that we need to be very mindful, because when you say like people in Jamaica are thinking about borders as an example, I have no doubt that there's right-wing forces in Jamaica, and also just like even what the United States is doing in Venezuela is going to create a lot of border and migration problems that you're already seeing in Trinidad, as an example. So there might be there's going to be some heat there. But when, as an example, like Celso Amorim talks about Brazilian sovereignty and like the sense of Brazil being a country that is not at the whim of U.S. foreign policy, that impulse for autonomy, sovereignty, and borders in a developing context is a radically different politics and is a radically different thing. And if that gets lost in a broader conversation about these things, that's a really big problem. So I think there's three steps. There's one is that right now, dealing with the human rights crisis as it exists right now presently doesn't require any sort of like broader argument that could trigger a vast majority of people. It has to do with like, this is what's reality, this is what we need to be in compliance with now. And then there's radically different versions of why people come to that rhetoric that need to be disaggregated. And then number three, like, we can explore and entertain utopian scenarios, and that's cool. But it should definitely not be used, never used, and this is just a core of my politics, that, don't allow that to interfere with what is politically effective today. Like, is it like, look, Bernie Sanders is not going to say he supports open borders, right? That's fine.
Of course not.
Of course not. And there's no problem with that. What there needs to be done is the clarity of his position on some of these issues. You guys want to jump in on this for a second? All right.
Well, I don't see it interfering with our day-to-day struggles. Like a lot of people who are doing the most work organizing are doing it from a place of a combination of this, what you call a utopian horizon, because they are socialists, communists, and anarchists.
Well, not all
and
socialists,
a desire
communists, and
to-
anarchists have exactly the same thinking on this.
Sure,
That's important to know.
But like, we can't be a purely reactive force in the world.
It's not
Otherwise,
purely-
we're never going to solve the problems in
definitely
the long term.
not purely
This is a
reactive
critique that
to
I also have
coordinate
of
those-
anti-fascism, right?
Mhm.
Because we have to react to fascism. We have, and this is connected to that. We have to react to fascism. We have to react to kids in cages. These things are horrendous, and we can't wait to do that. At the same time, if we're only reactive and we never solve the root problems and we never take it further than the status quo, further than we started from, which was already not that good, we're not going to solve these problems in the long term. And I just want to recommend an article by Natasha Leonard in The Intercept called "The El Paso Shooter Embraced Ecofascism. We Can't Let the Far Right Co-opt the Environmental Struggle." And it talks about how some of this rhetoric can take us some very damaging places if we're not careful.
As of now, the core of this, like in terms of dealing with more structural long-term problems, that is the U.S. foreign policy dimension. That is the number one thing in an actionable sense that needs to be integrated and incorporated in this conversation. And the one thing is that when you do get to some of that specific rhetoric, which takes us off in these sort of like side conversations at times and unnecessarily triggers people, I don't see it as being effective or strategic. But that has nothing to do with just being reactive. There's a whole set of that has nothing to do with abolishing ICE, that has nothing to do with, as I said, literally conforming with international standards that can actually credibly be implemented now, that would have a radical effect on everything from the arms trade to foreign policy to refugees and migration. I appreciate the call, Dave.
Agree with you.
We do have to keep, we're gotta keep going though, because we only have like 1 minute or 2 minutes
To
left.
be continued.
I'm sure it'll be continued. Mehdi, as an Iranian listening to the show, I agree with your guest. Sanctioning Zarif is very bad. It seems the U.S. ran out of ideas for diplomacy. However, if we didn't have a nuclear issue, thanks to Donald Trump, I would support being scrutinizing of Zarif. I would support Zarif being scrutinized for human rights in Iran. There's several prominent environmental activists in jail for no reason. It's harder to ask these questions when politics is limited to war and nuclear issues. Well, I agree with you completely, although I don't think Zarif is the person whose portfolio is implicated there. I mean, that's a very odd pick, but you might know more than me. Love the show. Just became a subscriber after listening regularly for a few months. Can you talk a bit about how Eric Weinstein is the new Dave Rubin, but with a slight amount of sophistication? Didn't we already do that?
Yeah, we already did that. I mean, just listen to the first 20 minutes of his interview with Peter Thiel and like do everything he says in a Dave Rubin voice, and you'll basically have the segment we would have done.
Sounds about right. Okay. Literally one very, very quick final call. Obviously not going to get to all callers. That's just the new reality. You're calling from a 206 area code.
Gotta be quick.
Hello?
206. What's on your mind? Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Bellevue, Washington. I just had a quick question. What do you think is the most important thing for the next presidential candidate that comes in, if it is a Democrat, to do?
I probably think that I don't like questions like that because it's such an interdependent agenda. But if I had to pick one thing, single payer healthcare. Thanks for the call. All right.
I would say keep the movement going.
Keep the movement going. That's smart. I like that.
Yeah, show up to the grassroots struggles and be feed into them rather than acting as a check on them.
All right. Duct tape dip shoot. At 3K, TMBS Mangria party? No, we're not. We're only doing pleasant things when we hit our goals on TMBS.
We want to reward ourselves, not punish ourselves for success.
Yeah, we're accomplishing things and we're doing a really great show. So we're gonna the thing at 3,000. Although I did say, I think at 3,000, I will probably try to wear a tracksuit when I go on I-24 because that would actually be really funny.
You have to figure out a way to film that.
Do that anyway.
No, we're not going to let you on.
Oh no, they once you're there, they let you on. Okay, final IM of the day. Let's see. Where is the final I am of the day? Where is the final I am of the day? I will find this. 1 second. Trying to find something good. Okay, let's just try this. Cosmic Yawn. Do these media types think that anyone is really offended by Bernie's critique of the media outside of D.C.? This is the same exact insularity that made them totally blindsided by Trump. I agree with you.
Well, they know that certain people are, and it's all their friends.
Indeed. All right, guys. See you tomorrow.
Take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. The months drifted into years while I shifted in and out of gear.